Downs.
Here.
Regent Ariscata. Regent Boylan.
Aye.
Regent Breaker.
Here.
Regent Brooks.
Here.
Regent Brown. Regent Cruz Crawford. Regent Del Carlo.
Here.
Regent Goodman.
Here.
Regent McMichael.
Here.
Regent Perkins. Regent Tarkanian. You have a quorum present.
Thank you. Item number 19, public comment. For those who would like to call in and offer public comment, please dial 669-444-9171 and enter meeting ID 928-4944-5069 and passcode 555555. Is there any public comment at GBC?
There's none at this time.
Thank you. Is there any public comment at the system office in Las Vegas?
Yes, there is public comment.
Thank you. Please state and spell your name, and you have 2 minutes. Your microphone is not on, I believe.
Dr. Bill Robinson, Faculty Senate, past chair of the Faculty Senate at UNLV. I apologize for being here. I promised I wouldn't be here this soon, but I'm here this soon anyhow. So, quick. Number one, you had a discussion about how to deal with tenure yesterday. For those of us who are old and remember when the Board of Regents used to say things about faculty and tried to deny faculty tenure and that kind of stuff at meetings, the board did a really good job of separating themselves from the tenure decisions. And I'm not opposed to the board being more informed. We need to walk that line really carefully. If you don't know the implications of McClure versus UNLV relative to tenure decisions in the NSHE, you need to know the importance of what McClure versus UNLV did and how that applies to all this. And it's scary if we open that door back up. We need to be really cautious there. I have to talk about the safety stuff. I have to talk about the safety stuff. I sent you all a way too long email yesterday. We are not paying attention enough to the safety stuff. We're not enough concerned. I don't know anyone on the Senate made safety its number one issue for this year, which means we're not happy. Our number two issue is mental and physical health issues. That means we're not happy. There's nobody on campus who thinks we're doing enough. There's a lot of stuff that the president has done that I really like, and there's lots of things about him I really like, but I don't like anything about how we've handled the response to December 6th, and I'm going to continue to not like how we've not handled the response to December 6th. And then lastly, I just want to remind you all that you're going to vote on a budget today and that you have the new formula. And yet the campuses have had for years that you've known structural budget deficits. There are problems with the budget. There are problems with how enrollment has changed from the pandemic that have affected the budget and student fees and all this stuff. And somehow, from what I've seen from the last 2 years at least, there hasn't been a coordination of the board where you really understand the financial and budget situations of the campuses while you're trying to do a
Dr.
legislative
Robinson,
budget. And while
sorry.
my time is up?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you all. Bye.
Is there any other public comment in Las Vegas?
No, not at
Yes.
this time. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Regent McMichael?
Yes, this is Regent McMichael, McMichael. I just wanted to make a comment in regards to cybersecurity for students who are victims of ghost enrollments. I've recently discovered that several thousands, in fact, 5,700 students have been affected by these ghost enrollments, which affect their Pell Grants as well as their credit ratings. And I think we need to pay more attention to the students themselves and try and make sure that they're well educated and can catch these intrusions into their identities much quicker so that they can have less effect on their livelihoods in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment in Las Vegas?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. Is there public comment here at WNC?
Yes, good morning. Aaron Hill, Aaronhill, and I'm the Faculty Senate Chair at the University of Nevada, Reno, here to comment in conditional support of the potential action item in Agenda Item 20 on the funding formula. We believe that the community colleges deserve much more investment from the state. And the values in the funding formula that deal with Pell Grant recipients, underrepresented minorities, the social mobility that community colleges offer should demonstrate to the governor, the legislature, of the value of the work that they do and how much more of it they could do with greater investment. However, it should not come at the expense of millions of dollars in the operating budgets of our state's R1 universities. I know I'm in year 7 of having come here, and when I chose to leave my previous position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison to come to UNR, I very proudly told everyone that would listen that it's a growing university that's turning from a regional university into a national university. Soon after my arrival, we and UNLV, our sister institution, earned R1 status, as this board well knows. There's no fat left to trim in what we're doing. We are not overfunded. If we want to keep our graduation rates going up, keep offering students the services they need, particularly all the first-gen students we serve, as we become an HSI, as we move towards becoming an HSI and an MSI, we can be a national university that does high-level work and also makes a difference in the lives of ordinary Nevadans and offers that same social mobility. So if there's any way to make a case to the legislature and the governor to offer more support to the community colleges without doing any harm to the R1 universities, that way we can rise together as a system. And I hope that there's a way to do that from this body to the legislature. I appreciate it.
Deborah Arteaga, that is Deborah. Last name is AR, T as in Tom, A, G as in girl, A. I am Faculty Senate Chair from UNLV. Chancellor Carlton, Chair at Carvalho and Regents, I want to echo what my colleague has said. We definitely support the community colleges. We have CSN, it is a vital piece of our higher education. We really appreciate them, but again, it cannot be at the expense of the R1 institutions. We have a budget deficit. We've had extraordinary things, unfortunate things happen on our campus. We need more funding for security, but we definitely do not want a budget cut. Again, funding the community colleges better is essential, but not at the expense of UNR and UNLV. Thank you.
Good morning, Rochelle Basson, Bassen. I am WSNE faculty and the NFA chapter president this year. I'm speaking on 2 points this morning. The first one is to encourage the board, as they discussed the funding formula this morning, to consider retaining the small institution factor that was presented at the funding formula committee. This would increase the weighted student credit hour funding from $30 to $40. As well as increase the cap to $125,000. This is really important to WNC because we are set to lose our small institution factor if we don't increase the cap. And since we are the smallest institution of Nevada, it really does not make sense to lose that factor. And it's really important for maintaining our CTE programs. And because they are thriving, that is why we are increasing that weight so significantly. And of course, this is to maintain advising and support services and all of the costs associated with those programs. And then the second point I'd like to consider, for you to consider, is the ongoing discussions for the Title IV, Chapter 4 proposed revisions by NFA And this is not to enforce or establish any new collective bargaining chapters. It's really about aligning the the board language to the Nevada State Constitution on collective bargaining rights, and permits, it's to also grant independence to our institutions to form their collective bargaining chapters, but you still have to have at least 50% of faculty who want to form that chapter. So I'm just advocating that it does help diffuse communications between faculty and administration when you do have an NFA rep established as a collective bargaining chapter to communicate with administration. So thank you very much.
Good morning, Kent Irvin, ERVIN, Nevada Faculty Alliance. Agenda item 20 presents the new formula recommended by the ad hoc committee. The committee fulfilled the chancellor's charge to revise the funding formula with no new funding and no examination of student fees. The recommendation adds significant new formula components to address the needs of underrepresented and Pell Grant students, and it provides performance factors with real teeth, as well as an enhancement of the small institution factor while reducing the weighted student credit hour component. Without additional funding, however, this new formula merely transfers funds from some institutions to others, creating winners and losers. The only way the new formula would be a true success is if new funding was made available for the new components. The request in agenda item 20 for an additional $20 million per year in hold harmless funding is therefore crucial. Gaining the governor's and legislators' support for that funding is the serious challenge that NSHE faces in the next budget. We support that request. A united appeal from the legislature from all of the NSHE community will be needed. During the budget process, the NFA pledges to work with NSHE and the institutions and faculty senates to make the case for adequate and equitable funding of all of our colleges and universities for all faculty and students. The funding adequacy study that NSHE is now pursuing will be very important, hopefully with results in time to make a difference. Make no mistake, NSHE institutions will still be underfunded. We're starting from 50th among the states in total revenue per student. It is also will be important for NSHE to work with the institutions and faculty to develop new performance factors that do not just track with total enrollments, but have true measures of relative student achievement. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment here at Western Nevada College, SES, is there any public comment on the phone?
Yes, Madam Chair. Caller with the number ending in 9880. Please press *6 to unmute. State and spell your name for the record, and you have 2 minutes to address the board. That's the only caller we have at this time, Madam Chair. They're not unmuting.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'll close public comment and we'll move to item number 13, Handbook Revision Institutional Mission Statement, GBC. For this, I will go to President Donnelly.
Good morning. For the record, Dr. Amber Donnelly, President, Great Basin College, Chair Carvalho, Vice Chair Downs, Regents, and Chancellor Charlton. GBC requests that the NSHE Board of Regents approve the GBC mission statement as written and approved in the 2022 to 2025 GBC strategic plan that was presented and approved by the Board of Regents at the quarterly meeting in December the 1st through the 2nd of 2022. The new mission statement was inadvertently missed at that time. Our mission statement is transforming lives through education. It's easy to say, it's easy to remember, and it's what we do. So we are looking for you guys just to put that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, President Donnelly.
So moved. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Regent Boylan, were you making a motion?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I was saying I approve that. It's a wonderful statement, and I really enjoyed simple, concise and easy to remember. So, what was it again? No, I'm kidding. It's easy to remember. So I think we should go ahead and make that change. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So I have a motion from Regent Boylant and a second from Regent Del Carlo. Any other discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Next is item number 16, 2023-2025 Biennial Strategic Plan for SCS. And for this, I will ask System Computing Services Chief Information Officer Ann Milkovich to present. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Regents. Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to update you all on our current strategic plan. And it is called Friction Free. So the first thing I want to point out is that SCS runs operations for the NSHE institutions, and we also run some operations for the state of Nevada. I've explained much of this in presentations in the past. What I want to focus on today are the innovations that we also provide and run on behalf of NSHE and on the state, improving services, improving access to education, and meeting goals of NSHE. So this is our strategic plan. And if you would like to follow along at home or on your laptop, you can see if you go to the SCS homepage, which is scs.nevada.edu, there's a drop-down menu about SCS, and there is a link there to our strategy, or you can also go to scs.nevada.edu/strategy. So in looking at this strategic plan, friction-free, again, is our vision for this biennium. As much as possible, that is our goal for all of our customers, internal and external, that we make their lives as easy as possible. I like having a short, concise vision, so again, people can remember it, and every time you go into work, you know what we're supposed to be doing that day. Make lives as friction-free as possible. We also, of course, still have our mission that we connect NSHE and Nevada through highly valued shared digital services. On the left-hand side, you can see our operations that you're familiar with: administrative information systems, information security, all of our infrastructure services, research engineering, student information, our user services that you see in action here today, and all of our support operations. I also want to point out the 4 guardrails that we live with and abide to. Guardrail 1 is strategic alignment, 2 is customer service, 3 is operational excellence, and 4 is risk management. If you want an acronym, you can remember it as SCORE. These are perpetual. These don't change. And these are levers that we use to adjust what we do and help determine what we should be doing. So first of all, we need to be in a strategic alignment with the NSHE goals and priorities, and that is something that we're always watching. Customer experience, making sure that people are having a good experience in all of the services that we provide. Operational excellence, make sure we're doing everything as efficiently as we can and cost effectively, and managing risk. And if you think about it, if you adjust one, you're going to have an inverse reaction in another one. If you improve customer experience, you're likely not going to be as operationally efficient. If our customers have what they want, we would all like to have our own concierge, right? That was there to help us whatever we need, when we need it, when we have a question, when we can't figure it out. And we could do that, but we would not be operating efficiently. If we wanted to really lock down on risk management and make this a very secure environment, well, the first thing we would do is unplug everything. But short of that, we would make you change your passwords once a week. We could implement all kinds of restrictions that would make us more secure and mitigate risk at a great loss to customer experience. So we're always balancing these levers to achieve the optimum as best we can. But let's focus on the innovations. So some of our innovations are on student success and research, building access and improving access for rural constituents, for urban constituents, everywhere we can, decision support, and asset protection. But first, I'd like to just highlight a few of those. Eduroam is a service that we've been rolling out to the state of Nevada, and it's one of our favorites right now. Eduroam benefits students, faculty, and staff wherever they go where Eduroam service is provided. Some of you experienced this here at WNC, which is providing Eduroam service, where you could walk in, open up your laptop, turn on your phone, and you were already connected and you didn't have to do anything. Imagine that for our students. And Eduroam is provided right now in the city of Las Vegas. Anywhere students go in the city of Las Vegas, they can connect to Eduroam. Instead of trying to find Wi-Fi somewhere and connecting to potentially an unsecure Wi-Fi, they can find Eduroam in public locations throughout the city of Las Vegas. We are working with areas throughout Nevada to provide this service. It's also available in our K-12s. And for many of our K-12s, and we continue to bring more K-12s onto the service as efficiently as we can and as they are able to do it. So now our high school students who have Eduroam at their high school, they can come to these campuses, same experience. They open their laptop, they're on. We don't have to fuss around to what's the guest Wi-Fi? It's not working for me. They're already automatically on. Eduroam can be deployed anywhere in the world. It's widely available in Europe. In Europe, for example, train stations offer Eduroam. So any student, faculty, or staff of an educational institution can go to many locations in Europe, open their laptop, they're on. And they're on a secure network without asking any questions or hassling with it at all. So this is a great benefit to our constituents, our education institutions, our students, faculty, and staff, as well as K-12s throughout Nevada. We offer this service because we are the state connector for Eduroam. It can only come through SCS because we are the identified state provider for this. And so far, Nevada is the 6th state in the country that is offering Eduroam ubiquitously as we are doing. And we're offering it at no cost to the constituents. So, for example, the city of Las Vegas had to set up a server and manage a server to provide Eduroam service. That's a negligible cost to them, but we cover all the cost of licensing and also for all of our institutions and all of our K-12s. Next, I'd like to talk about an exciting new grant opportunity that we have, which is the Wild West NSF grant. This is a new grant for cyber infrastructure build-out. We are the lead, SCS has the lead principal investigator. We are in collaboration with UNLV, UNR, DRI, as well as the University of Utah and Arizona State University. We are building cyber infrastructure in the world of wild things. So out in field sciences, there are many sensors collecting data. Up in the mountains, out in the fields. These are just some photos of some recent installations that are going up. These are collecting data about wildlife management, about forests, about wildfire, about earthquake, and sensing tremors in the ground. All of this field research has sensors everywhere. They are referred to as the Internet of Wild Things. That is a term, and it's a fun one. But they need to get that data back to the lab. So in the old times, a researcher would have to drive out to these sensor locations, swap out a hard drive, and bring back the data, drive the data back. In the Middle Ages, we are able to route and transit that data through line-of-sight microwaves, but we have to. There are no internet access points out there, right? So, and there's no fiber out there. So you have a microwave dish that points to a microwave dish on the other mountain that points to a different microwave dish. And sometimes it's 6 hops to get that data from one dish all the way back to where they can connect to fiber and connect to the internet. So this grant is enabling building out the field network for cyber infrastructure and enabling broader field science research to occur. And it is collaborative across the western region of Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. And hopefully we will be adding other states to this as well. Because as we all know, wildfire doesn't stop at the state border. So much of this field science needs to be across borders, and the cyber infrastructure needs to exist across borders as well. So this is a great example of a regional partnership, and Nevada is leading the way on this in the country. It's also a great opportunity for us to build out workforce development because the grant includes student interns, funding for student interns and research so that we can interest students in this type of work, train them so that when they graduate, they are prepared and ready to go into the workforce and into the research community. This also simplifies the workflow of scientific data across the country as we can start to share this information with other researchers across the country. And lastly, I'd like to highlight that we are working on our disaster recovery plan for our student information system. As you know, the student information system has a lot of integrations with a lot of third parties. We connect to banks, we connect to payment centers. There are many connections to make a student information system ecosystem work. And as we saw in the CrowdStrike event, one mistake in one third party can ripple across the country. And while none of the NSHE institutions use CrowdStrike, our third-party vendors do. So we had nominal impact at best, but we saw in the country how fragile the entire integrated ecosystem is. And so we need to make sure that our student information system, which runs pretty much all of the operations of the institutions, if it fails, everything grinds to a halt. So it is our most vital resource to protect. And we are taking this to the next level by moving our student information systems into cloud-based systems and environments so that we can better protect it and ensure that it has far less opportunity for failure than in the current. We have it backed up. Nightly, it's backed up from the south to the north, from the north to the south. So we have the data, it's always preserved. But to enable all of these integrations to recover in minutes, which is the ideal, then we need something more powerful than nightly backups to disparate regions. So with that, I would like to open the floor for questions, and I would just like to say again that what I really want you to take away from this presentation is that SCS is operations, and we are also innovations that are driving and enabling the goals of NSHE. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. I'll open it up to Regents. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Regent Del Carlo.
Thank you for really an informative presentation. I always wondered what Eurodome, what that was. I never knew what
Eduroam?
that-
Yes.
Yeah, Eduroam, whatever it's called. Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, and for us to lead the way on that grant is really great. I mean, thank you for your leadership here. I know you've been with us about 6-7 years now.
Almost 6 years, thank you.
Yeah, and maybe a future presentation, because I know you talk about how many times you got hacked and all that. We'll have a new board come January, so maybe I'll put that in new business so we can have an update there. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'll go to Regent Boylan and then Regent Goodman.
Thank you, Chair. This Internet of Wild Things, are we able to get to it? Can we watch what's happening out there in the wild, ma'am?
Ann Milkovich for the record. Thank you for that question, Regent Boylan. If you want to look at it, you could drive up there. You might need to hike quite a ways. You would need a four-wheel
Oh.
drive. If you want to look at the actual stations that are out there, otherwise, we're happy to send pictures. Was that your question? Did
No,
I
no, I
understand
meant-
your question correctly, sir?
Kind of, but I know I meant, is it possible to see these on the internet? Is it possible to get a real live action of, it's called the Internet of Wild Things. So I'd like to, once in a while, look out there in the wild again.
Sure, thank you. Ann Milkovich again for the record. So there are web cameras that are positioned in the wild, and there are websites that you can go to where you can watch wildlife through the webcam. I know that Yellowstone National Park has webcams, and probably many of the national parks. I don't know that you would have access to any of the webcams that are set up for research in Nevada at this time. I can look into that for you if you would like.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you. Appreciate that, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Regent Goodman?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question with the Edgerome. Is that, we received some public comment on some Wi-Fi issues out at Nevada State. Is that, is that working out there? Or like, how do we fix that for our students, you know, that are in the dorms out there?
Thank you, Regent Goodman. Ann Milkovich again. Wi-Fi and Edgerome are two slightly different things. So Wi-Fi service requires access points that are positioned to provide good service. And in some buildings, that's very hard to do because of the construction of the building. So the design and the locations of the Wi-Fi access points is what gives you good Wi-Fi connection. Edgerome is a service that runs on top of Wi-Fi, that if you have Wi-Fi connection and if Edgerome service is running in that location, then you can connect to the Edgerome network. But first you have to have good Wi-Fi access to get there. Does that answer your question?
It does. Is there anything that we can do to improve that as SCS? Is there anything you can do to improve that Wi-Fi access out there for the students?
I would be happy to, I can reach out to their CIO there, Brian Chongtai, and talk if they need any assistance with Wi-Fi improvements there. I'm happy to, we're always happy to help the institutions whenever they would like help from us. And I'll definitely reach out and look into
Great.
that.
Thank you. And I do have one follow-up question. With regard to the CrowdStrike incident, I've read that now there are places where you can just have all of your information and there is no digital access. It's almost like they've gone back to analog where they are keeping hard drives in certain spaces. Are we doing things like that just to you know, just for what's going to happen in the future? Just this, you know, all of these digital hacks are so prevalent.
Yes, we are working on, Ann Milkovich again, we are working on what's called cold storage, where we take data and move it to a location that is isolated from the internet. And so we are working on that. You have to be careful what you put into cold storage because that it can grow very quickly. You can't put everything there. But we are looking into the possibility of cold storage for some of our most critical data.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, I'll go to Regent Brown and then Regent McMichael.
Thank you, Regent Brown, for the record. I'm really happy that you brought up that NSF grant because I do think that is not something that we have truly celebrated. I know we talk about it a lot, but like this is just a really good example of why the Knowledge Fund is so important for the state because we can actually spend that money on going after these grants, which help with our research. I also wanted to point out the IoT, changing it to IOWT is actually hilarious and very, very comical for
I don't know who made that up, but they deserve a lot of credit.
Hilarious, yeah. I definitely LOL'd it on my paper. So I actually wanted to ask you, because I thought it was a really interesting dichotomy that you brought up with implementation. It's customer wants versus system needs. And I was hoping that we could, I know we talked about it in the securities committee, but I was hoping we could actually unpack a little bit about like what trainings are needed, how can we help with implementation, what are the responsibilities of the board versus the institution versus the faculty versus the staff, because I know everybody wants, you know, and you gave some great examples, but the needs far outweigh, and with limited budget, resources, time, I think it'd be interesting just to talk about how we can help with that from a board perspective. Should we like be looking into policy, to making things mandatory? I just think, you know, and Regent Goodman brings a really good, you know, there's a lot of things that are changing. And so how do we look to protect ourselves, not just today, but 10, 15 years from today?
Yes, thank you for the question, Ann Milkovich. We can do a lot without impacting customer experience too adversely. Human beings are the front line of cyber protection. They are also the weakest link. Cyber attacks through, people that are really good at hacking into computers and what we imagine to be cyber attacks actually occur rarely. What is far more common is simple human trickery. Faking somebody out by faking their audio, the voice, as we heard in the security committee yesterday. It's very easy to fake voices now, and they sound extremely accurate. And then you can make that voice say whatever you want it to say. So somebody can get a phone call, it sounds just like Regent Brown, just like Ann Milkovich, and I'm saying, I need gift cards, I need this, I need your information because I'm stuck and I don't have a bus pass or whatever it is. But so it's very easy. It's also very easy to fake visuals. There was one fraud that occurred in a country in Asia where they faked 5 executives in a Zoom meeting who called an administrative assistant and said they needed money transferred immediately. It looked like them. It sounded like them. She did it. Of course she did. So human beings are the first line. And the most important thing that I advocate all the time is security awareness training, briefly, frequently. So right now within SCS, we require it's mandatory security awareness training. It's about 5 minutes per month, every month. And that is, in my opinion, better than 2 hours a year, because what we're trying to do is break the muscle memory where people automatically click a link because you're going through your email, click, 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 and you hit reply or you hit click the link. It's trying to break that muscle memory where frequency is more important than and more palatable than a lengthy security awareness training. That's what I advocate for. The board could help with that by making that mandatory for the institutions. All of the IT leaders at the institutions want security awareness training to be mandatory, but they don't have the authority to require that. And they don't have backing. So backing from the board would be very helpful to require security awareness training. And again, I advocate for brief but frequent. So yes, thank you for that question.
Thank you. Regent McMichael.
Yes, I was just curious. Near the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that you had to use 1, 2, 3, as many as 4 dishes to communicate this data back. Why can't we just use a satellite uplink?
Thank you for that question, Ann Milkovich again. We are using Starlink for some satellite communications, and that is a possibility. But it doesn't work everywhere and consistently, and there are many compounding factors, so that's not always possible. And in order to use satellite dish, you have to have the satellite dish positioned at the station, and that also is very costly and difficult to do. So our current cyber infrastructure build out that we're working on is more cost effective in the long run than using individual satellite dishes positioned all over the mountains, desert. Does that answer your question, Regent McMichael?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Regent Del Carlo?
Thank you, Chair Carvalho. I just want to add to what you just said, trying to change that muscle memory, because I saw that done in the industry I worked in. It was on safety, and we were trained from DuPont, which is, world's largest chemical company, and certainly easily you could have many, many errors and accidents. But so we would start our shift. This was in operations and warehousing management with like 5 minutes for safety, like you're saying. And we gather the troops together, and the first thing you do is talk these little 5-minute safety talk. And it really does change that muscle memory. So, I mean, I'm going to ask a new business that we will look into what you're asking for, that it's not mandatory. Maybe that board needs to look at that and make a policy, because you can't be trained enough, really. And I'm really vulnerable at my age, because I didn't grow up with all this stuff, and I'm always getting emails, and I can't tell. Sometimes I can't tell. And I send them to my husband. He gets a little disgusted with me because he's way more, cognizant of this stuff. And it's like, I'm so easy to be duped. And what you just said, I just got an email from somebody the other day, took some of the political candidates, and I know it's fake, and it sounds exactly like them. I mean, I just could not believe it. So I really think we need more training. Certainly our students and our faculty and staff, we all need more training in this area to protect us. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Del Carlo.
For this.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's for informational. Next, we'll go on to item number 17, code revision for employee resignations. And for this, I will turn it to Chancellor Charlton.
Good morning. For the record, Patty Charlton, Chancellor, Nevada System of Higher Education. So today I'm bringing before you on behalf of Chief Human Resources Officer Eric Gilliland, who can't be with us today, the first reading of a code revision on employee resignations. And this is coming before you as a result of an NSHE internal audit. And so this will also help with our audit processes to close a recommendation that came before the audit committee. And this is really as a result of not just the audit, but coordination with the Human Resources Advisory Committee as well. And it is to put into policy and into the code basically the actual processes that are occurring within our institution, and to update this process to include that we now have our workday system, and that resignations may also, do not have to be, submitted through the Workday portal. And so an employee can submit it to their supervisor in writing. They may also go through the Workday process. It doesn't require that. But what it does require is that the employee is notified by their supervisor that that resignation has been accepted. And so that can also be done via Workday and or in writing to the employee. And so this code amendment just basically solidifies the process that has been in place at campuses. And so with that, I'm available for any questions. And again, this will come back before the board for a second reading.
Thank you for presenting. Are there any questions or comments for the Chancellor regarding this code revision? Yes, Regent Ariscotta.
Just a comment. It's baffling to hear how convoluted it was to submit a resignation. I did not understand it with audit. I did not understand it then. And today it still seems a ridiculous process to find a conduit to express that you're resigning from a position. This needs to be streamlined. Thank you.
We couldn't agree more.
Thank you. I have one question. I believe it came up in public comment that there was a concern that, and I may have gotten this wrong, but that a resignation could be tendered verbally. But I see in section 5.15 under resignations, item B, if a resignation is tendered verbally or is conveyed to an employee other than the appointing authority, the resignation must still be accepted by the appointing authority or designee in writing or via Workday. That's the new language. And I'm assuming that it means that it still has to be submitted into Workday by the employee who is resigning.
So I'm going to ask Council Parker to assist on this because employees that the opportunity to submit a verbal resignation has been in process because that can be in practicality. And so I'm going to ask Council Parker, please.
Good morning, Board. Deputy General Counsel Carrie Parker for the record. We have looked into the concern that as I understand it, is whether someone could verbally resign and maybe it was done spontaneously and not with a lot of thought, and then a supervisor could initiate it through Workday. I have been working with one of our HR directors here this morning since we received the public comment to double check. And so far, we have not found a way that a resignation could be initiated by a supervisor in Workday. The employee would still need to go in to initiate that in Workday. So this policy provides for the options of written notification from the appointing authority, which could be in any way written through an email or a memo, or Workday for the acceptance. And the acceptance is always delayed to the 4th business day because the employee has the right to revoke a resignation for the 3 working days.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. Okay, this is the first reading of this code revision. It appears that there's no other comment or discussion regarding this. So we will move on. This is for information only. Thank you very much. So next we will go to item number 20, funding formula study recommendations and 2025-27 biennial NSHE state operating budget request. And again, this is for Chancellor Charlton.
Okay, good morning. For the record, Patty Charlton, Chancellor, Nevada System of Higher Education, and also served as Vice Chair of the Higher Education Funding Committee ad hoc group. I'm going to be joined today. I'm going to take the first part of the presentation, and then Vice Chancellor Vitone's going to dazzle you with lots of numbers and charts and slides. And so I get the bulk of the content as far as the committee. Just to start, and I am going to apologize in advance because I often get very excited when I'm talking about the funding formula, believe it or not. I've been a part of this process for going on now 30 years, pretty much, from small little tweaks to the formula to comprehensive changes. And so this time sitting in a very different place. This process started as a result of the legislative session in which NSHE received $2 million to perform a study of the funding formula. That distinction is very important, that it was a study of the formula. It was not a funding study. And so what's coming before you today is the recommendations from the ad hoc committee, but we are also adding to this conversation a recommendation for this board to also include a funding recommendation to address the full implementation of those recommendations that we have solidified to date. I think that's very, very important. The formula that we have that is in play served its purpose. We have 2 R1 institutions. There was significant effort put forward to ensure that our R1 institutions reach that status, and they have. We need to maintain that. It is a part of our strategic focus for the state. We also have a very high priority across our state to support our community colleges and their economic and workforce development initiative, as well as Nevada State University, who also aligns within that framework as well. So this recommendation that you will see before you is one to accept the recommendations of the committee, but then also to add a funding item as part of the board's request to the legislature, through the governor's office, and to the legislature. This is going to take all of us together, and so just want to let you know that that is what you're going to see before you today, and we're going to walk through how we got to this point. So with this, again, I presented this before. I'm not going to read the slide because I know that the Regents do not like when we read the slides to you, so that's not going to happen. And so again, the committee began following the 2023 legislative session, where it had a very specific charge, and it was to look at funding formula models that are used in other states that were comparable to NSHE, and then also to basically look at how those models compared to what we have today in the delivery of instruction. It is important to note that this formula is specific to the 7 teaching institutions. This does not include the Desert Research Institution, which had some changes to the formula after the last session. However, I promise that DRI was included in all of our conversations to the extent, and I think President Achara just said, just leave us alone. Is that accurate? We also had, as part of that charge, is to determine if there should be different funding allocations based on the different types of institutions. We have 7 institutions, and so we'll talk a little bit about that recommendation. And then also to look at how we can make recommendations of how we capture and are transparent in the expenditures and the budgeting of our self-supporting budgets as well. So the committee was a fantastic committee, I have to say, very, very engaged. We had 3 members of this body. Thank you again, and I thanked them yesterday, but I have to do it again because they spent a ton of time. Regent Brooks, Regent Goodman, and Regent Del Carlo participated in this process. 4 members that were identified by the governor, and I have to give a significant shout out to Chief Justice Hardesty, who chaired this committee. I think he learned more than he ever really wanted to know about funding formulas, but not everything he wanted to know about NSHE. Just did an absolutely fantastic job, and I'm really appreciative to him because he has pledged his continued support to help us move this forward through the session. The governor's other appointments included Rick Combs, who many of us have worked with in the past, not for, but with in the past in finance within higher education and the legislature, Glenn Christensen, and Betsy Fretwell. We also had 1 member, Senator Dondero Loop, that was nominated by the majority leader. The minority leader recommended Senator Buck, Assemblywoman Mosca, Assemblyman Gray, and again, I served as vice chair. And then we had 2 members of the public with advocacy work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that was Yvette Williams from the Southern Nevada Black Caucus and Tony Sanchez, which many of us know from NV Energy. And then we had non-voting members, of which our presidents voted, and I don't know if he had left the room that day, but President Dalpy served as the president's appointment. Amy Stevenson from the governor's finance office, who we worked very, very closely with, and we were grateful to have her as part of this. 2 business officers, Lindsay Session and Vice Chancellor Vitone. Peter Reed, as you might remember from last year as chair of chairs, Stacy Wallace from Nevada State representing our classified council, and Susanna Stantucci from, it says Western, which she was with Western, but I understand she's at Nevada State University now. So we thank them all for their service. So the committee's work was broken down into some very, very specific elements. One, we had to establish a framework and do a lot of education on the front end. So we began our work in November, took a little bit of a break over the holidays because there was a lot of heavy lift. And as you can see in February, there was a massive amount of information that was delivered. One, it was a first review from our consultants on the topology of what's happening across the country in funding formulas. And then we also asked, the chair did, because he really wanted to have, and this was very purposeful in the work that we did, is to have involvement and inclusion from stakeholders, and beginning with the presidents. And so at that point, we began. We thought we were going to get all of those presentations done in one meeting, but that didn't happen. So we started with a presentation from the institutions where the presidents provided an overview of how the funding formula aligns with their mission and whether or not they're able to fulfill their mission. And so that presentation happened in February. We moved on, finished those in March, and then continued our work looking at self-supporting accounts. And again, that's with the lens of transparency and how are there other models that can help us, and then going through some of the initial review. I'm not going to read this again. It's in your materials, and it's also included in the report that was issued on August the 16th. And so we continued our work, and then on July the 25th, we had our final work session, which was a heavy, heavy lift where the consultants presented some recommendations on the funding formula, but then the committee really rolled up their sleeves and made quite a bit of changes to that and tweaks along the way, and then also provided some recommendations for some further evaluation and next steps. For ensuring that we could communicate all the actions that were happening and all the materials, we do have a website that was put up prior to the start of the first meetings, and it has an archive of all the materials, including our prior studies that had been done. And so that is still available, and you can find it right off of the homepage of NSHE. And then also on August the 16th, 2 weeks early, by the way, the report was transmitted to this body, as well as to the governor's office and to the Legislative Council Bureau. And looks a little bit like that. So, and it has all of our materials. So as we walked through the process, we used external subject matter experts. That was a part of the bill and what we could entail. And so we did an RFP, and we had HCM strategists that were successful in that effort, and they assisted the committee throughout the process. And they started by evaluating the current formula that we are using, looking at that comparison that I mentioned from other states, giving some recommendations to the committee, and then also reviewing that policy perspective of the self-supporting accounts. And as I mentioned, stakeholder engagement and participation was vital and key. And so the institutions presented over those 2 meetings that happened in February and March. We had written comments, and our NFA provided significant volumes of information and analysis. And so we appreciate NFA's involvement. And then we also, again, have followed back up with the Council of Presidents, meeting with business officers, and then also the chair invited in also faculty and student representatives. So we heard from our Nevada Student Alliance, and we also heard from our faculty senate with a different institution type, including NFA in that process. So we appreciated all of that input. So the consultants' review and recommendations, I'm going to just touch on this very quickly. HCM strategists used that, again, looked at our current funding methodology and what might enhancements look like, improving an equity perspective and a much more student-centered allocation method. And a lot of that also had to do with that direct feedback from our institutions. You know what? The current formula doesn't recognize that we have a large amount of part-time students. The current formula doesn't recognize that we have a large population of underrepresented minorities, that we need to ensure that we have resources that are dedicated. And it doesn't recognize the fact that we have a large Pell population. There's additional resources that are needed at campuses to support that. The performance pool is one that no one liked. This body asked to have that pulled. The presidents universally said they don't like the performance pool. And so what we did is derived a recommendation that was much more outcomes-based, does not have a carve-out, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that, but then also takes a relative growth model, looking at an institution's perspective from where they are, and then also supporting them in continuous improvement, which is a cornerstone of the work that we do in higher ed.
Thank you. Regent Cruz Crawford, question, what were you saying again about the outcome base they didn't like, the presidents didn't like? Can you explain that to me?
They don't like the performance pool.
Okay.
No one liked the performance pool. So this
is, sorry, can you tell me what that is?
Okay, so the performance pool, basically today, and the formula that we use today, we have our pie, and we always talk about funding within a pie. It takes 20% off of the top for institutions to have to earn back. So they have their funding, they're budgeted based on, they're budgeting every single day on their funding. However, in order to realize that 20%, they have to meet certain metrics and targets. I don't know if you have the reference.
Yeah, so Performance and what do they have to,
It
what is the metric?
So performance, it's different for, there's a general framework, but, okay, sorry, the print is very small.
Sorry, I'm looking through my K
No.
through 12 lens and seeing
Yeah, it
how
is.
funding works based on achievement.
It has to do with the attainment or the completion of bachelor's degree, and then that is subdivided by Pell recipients earning bachelor's degree. I'm going to just use UNLV as an example. Minority bachelor's degrees, and this is measured both of those. The data is from IPEDS. It looks at the master's and doctoral degrees. Again, subdivided by minority, master's and doctoral, Pell eligible, master's and doctoral outcomes, sponsored projects for the universities, and that's based on a factor of 100,000 per 100,000 of expenditures. Transfer students, the number of transfer students that have transferable associate's degrees, efficiencies, the number of awards per 100 FTE, and then each institution has had the ability to identify specific economic development degree attainment fields. And so, for example, for UNLV, it was STEM and allied health, as well as business and management. Nevada State is very similar. They don't have the research component, and CSN is also similar, but it also adds in the factor of certificates earned and also does not have the research component. So those were established in the prior funding formula, and so those have built, and Chris Fatone's going to walk through kind of what that looks like.
I agree with the presidents on that. I think it's great.
Okay.
I wanted to,
Yeah.
I'm trying to connect because sometimes what happens in higher ed happens in K through 12 and K through 12 and vice versa. Just seeing where we are on the pendulum.
Sure. No, understand. So, and the biggest concern is the fact that you have to earn back 20% of your own budget, and that can be quite difficult. We've only had one instance where those targets were not met, and so we're working on that front right now. So based on all of
Chancellor Charlton, I'm sorry.
Yes, okay.
Regent Del Carlo
Okay.
has.
I get really excited, I told you.
I know I do
I'm
too,
warning.
because I think this was really a linchpin of our whole funding formula, because the presidents really got listened to. I mean, and I never liked the 20% because, as you said, over 10 years, there's only one time they didn't get it. But what the fallacy was is that they would all get it, and some of them would get way over, and there was no reward. It's like, why am I working so hard and looking at the numbers? So this process really did work. And I wanted to say this too, because, you hire a consultant, and they're a consultant. They don't dictate to you what to do, because I really had the strong impression, and my two colleagues in Vegas can chime in too, but I had the feeling they did not want us to give up the performance pool. But we were adamant and insistent that we're the customer, this is what we want. And I think when we came up with the outcomes-based funding, as Chancellor Charlton will get into soon, you're going to like that. Thank you.
Agree. We actually, one of the things that the consultants noted is that Nevada was actually leading in the space on how the funding was determined based on those outcomes and the overall perspective. And so the recommended allocation, if you look currently, is how they viewed this 40%. So there was a recommendation of this carve out between student characteristics. We have some carve outs for core costs, which is a small institution factor in the research O&M. And then we also have this new outcomes-based approach, as well as the weighted student credit hours. So it was a 40-40-20 looking at that. But where we ended up, and again, this is comparing to where we are today with the 100% of our pie, of which 20% is an add back. So we're going to get into where we ended with the final recommendations. But we started early on, probably I would say maybe February, March. Right away, we recognized that the small institution factor was a major issue for our two small institutions, both Great Basin and Western. In particular, when we left the 2011 funding formula period, I think it happened between the 11-13 timeframe, there was a value of $30 applied to weighted student credit hours. That has not changed in 10 years. And we all know costs have certainly increased over the last 10 years. So there was a recommendation to not just increase it, but also to tie it to the HEPI, which is exactly what you do for your fees. To also look at the way that we're calculating the use of weighted student credit hour. Right now, it is based on the even year going into the biennium, but that may not actually tell the full picture of the trajectory of the enrollment. So there was a 3-year there's a 3-year average that was also factored in, and so that was a recommendation. It can soften some of the peaks and valleys that happen, but then also you'll see as Vice Chancellor Vitone goes into the details, is there's another kicker that if that is an advantage to the institution, either the 3-year average or the higher of the most current year. I believe that's how it was worded. And then again, the final report has all of that analysis and is included for the committee. So again, I wanted to highlight where we had opportunities for engagement and participation. Again, we looked and started with looking at each institution's board-approved mission. And so we started from that framework because that's really what the institutions are trying and seeking to achieve. And how does that funding align with their budget priorities? How does the current funding formula impact their ability to fulfill their mission? Because each of the institutions is very mindful of mission fulfillment. That is a cornerstone of the Northwest Commission and when they're all accredited. So we wanted to ensure that there was some connection point there. And then also looking at recommendations to improve how we allocate resources within the formula, and then again, submitting those written recommendations. When the presidents were asked, if you could change something or if you could make an improvement, what would that look like? Well, they provided 102 recommendations. So they had a lot to say, and they were right. Some of them were consistent across different institutions. Some were just a one-off from an institution, but all of those are included in the report that you have. But here's some of those highlights. One, looking at the base formula, looking at that small institution factor, funding fee waivers, which we know is a big challenge for our institution. The tax increase, modified business tax, that is really looking at a way to sustain or at least to have a sustainable and ongoing capital investment opportunity, because we've talked about the needs for capital. Looking at our salaries in COLA, and again, you can go through and there's a lot of recommendations in there, but those common themes were consistent. We need more resources and state investment for higher education. There was a desire, again, that each institution serves a very unique student population, and we needed to make sure that this new formula recognized those differences, and you'll see that in those student characteristics. And then again, ways that we don't just sit back and look at the funding formula every decade, to find a way that we can interweave this and make some significant or even just minor continuous improvement opportunities along the way. There was also, these are the 3 areas that the committee was asked to make recommendations on. The self-supporting accounts, we finished that work really easy. It did help. We actually had the consultants look at the LCB audit and NSHE's responses, and they thought that those were consistent and looked at best practices. And then they recommended a matrix so that actually for the board and for transparency, you can actually see the types of self-supporting revenues that we have and the types of expenditures, because many of the self-supporting funds that our institutions have are restricted. These are those fees that are added, but they're for a specific purpose. You can't use capital funding for salaries, for example. You can't use a designated lab fee or a differential fee to build a building. So, I mean, you have placed a lot of restrictions on the types of fees because you're very mindful of what those are. And then again, looking at the funding formula, allocation methodology, and ways that we can also examine further some of the areas that we just weren't able to get to based on the time frame, or areas that we just don't currently have data on. So I'm not going to read this, but again, the consultants looked at our self-supporting accounts and looked at the responses that we had, and they actually identified that the city University, CUNY in New York had a matrix approach, and so Vice Chancellor Vitone can talk about that a little bit more, but we're in the process of implementing something similar, as well as all of the other LCB audit recommendations that we had. And so this is the recommendation, is to develop again that matrix based on your current board policy. So other recommendations that came forward is, again, and I've highlighted this, is the small institution factor adjustment, and this is the increasing of that weight the assignment of the dollar amount to the weights from $30 to $40, but then to continue to adjust it based on the HEPI so that that continues to pace with other inflation adjustments. To increase that small institution factor, and right now it's 100,000 weighted student credit hours. The recommendation was to move it to 125,000, but we'll also talk a little bit about further research. And the reason being is an institution can still be small, especially if they are doing a lot of work in the CTE, because those weights are much higher, and it doesn't really capture the small factor of those institutions, and it's really needed. And a good example is Western just barely crossed the line by like 4,000 weights, and they would lose almost $1 million. Right? Yes. So the next recommendation is again based on how we use the weighted student credit hour and how that's applied into the formula. And so the recommendation was to use the greater of a 3-year average or the prior year. And so I talked about that a little bit. And then again, we've got the outcomes-based funding component, which eliminates the current performance pool, replaces it with the outcomes-based funding, and allocates the resources based on a relative growth model. And again, you're going to see in the second half of the presentation, each of these areas walk through in more specifics. Additional recommendations that came forward is the one that I highlighted, which is new, which really addresses the difference in our institutions, and that is those student attributes, and using that as part of the funding formula and the funding allocation model. The three areas specifically was to look at student headcount enrollments and credit hours. It did not include originally the non-resident students, and then the underrepresented minority student headcount enrollments and their credit hours, and then finally the Pell eligible. So this is adding in that student characteristic. The next recommendation, instead of that 40-40-20, 40% weighted student credit hours, 40% student characteristics, and 20% on the outcomes base, the committee landed on a 75-10-15. As we ran the 40-40-20, it was significantly detrimental and had large shifts, ones that I think were just quite shocking as you started to look at the numbers. And as it's important for me to note that as we were going through the formula process, on July the 25th, which was the work session, we did not have final FY24 enrollment numbers, and we also didn't have what we call our base maintenance and enhancement budget for the new biennium. And so the numbers did change significantly because now we have all of those numbers, and we wanted to update it in as close to real time as we could. The committee also recommended that there be a softening of any implementation so that any institution that might have a negative allocation would be capped. There were several areas that the committee definitely said we need further examination, we need to continue research in this area, because there were either a recommendation that came forward from the institutions and or just something that would be ongoing. And so the first is to, as I just mentioned, on the small institution factor, perhaps there's another way to look at it, not just on weighted student credit hour, but perhaps we should look at headcount or other factors. So that is going to continue, and that work is going to be led by our business officers, and those recommendations would come back to the board. We also wanted to have a further examination. One of the things that was recommended is we should look at annualizing and get funding, state funding for all of our section or all of our terms, including summer school. Well, there's a significant impact that could be realized at the institutions if the summer school was rolled into the state-supported operating budget, because right now, summer school is self-supporting. So what that means is that the institutions are retaining that revenue. They have a little premium that they charge. We don't get any state support. However, if we were to move that into our state-supported operating budget, the expectation would be is that the fees follow it, and that also goes in. So that would not be retained most likely at the institution. So we need to further review that, and we're going to ask the academic officers and the business officers to further look at that and have conversations with their institutions about what that impact would look like. Currently, the legislature has supported 2 areas of which we receive state support, and that is in summer school, and that is for nursing, and that has been in place for some time, but the revenue does follow. That component does go into the state and now education, because we need to have more nurses and more teachers. And so that has been worked through, and those we have done as one-offs with the legislature. And so we have that ability. The legislature has worked with us very well in those areas when we identify. Some of the institutions, and I would say particularly the community colleges, have talked about, should we also be looking at perhaps manufacturing or logistics, some of those high demand areas. So I'm going to stop because I think we've got a question or a comment.
Thank you. I just, one of the things that the consultants told us, which I didn't know, and I don't think most of us on the board would know this, but we are the only state, Nevada is the only state that does not fund summer school. And I just want us all to know that, because I know we've got a legislative session coming up, and it just helps us put our talking points together and our need for additional funding. However, the legislature, I think it was so good that we had 4 legislative representatives. You know, there was 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 2 senators, 2 assembly people, and they were very engaged and really got it. I mean, which is good, because now they can tell the story, and we'll possibly have a regent become a state senator, and she'll certainly get it. So thank you for letting me say that. It's important that we know where Nevada stands on things.
And a lot of that also is with the expectation and the hope to support students in completing their educational pathways sooner. So additional areas that we need to further continue to research, and some of this is because we don't necessarily have all of the data elements to validate right now. One was academic preparation. That can be defined in lots of different ways. One, we know that we have students that participate in co-requisite. Maybe that's an indicator of academic preparation. Maybe it's a ACT score, or whatever those factors are. We need more study, and we need to have that led by our institutional research officers that have a very solid handle on what type of information, what kind of data, because we want to ensure that the data, one, is consistent and that it is measurable. And so we will be bringing that forward at a later date before the board. But again, we're anticipating for the 2027 legislative session, because there is just a heavy lift that needs to happen there. Another area that was recommended is to look at should a student characteristic be for our students in poverty. This also is one that needs more definition. We need to ensure that we have the type of information. Pell eligibility may not necessarily be the only measure of that. And so we need to look at that. And we have certain student populations that don't complete the FAFSA, and we know that. And so we want to ensure that we also look at what data elements are available, have our institutional research officers lead this work, and that again, that the data is consistent, that it can be collected on an ongoing basis, and we know what that impact is. We don't have a good handle of what this represents in Nevada. So this would be another recommendation of that further study that would come back for the 2027 session. The other 2 areas and are super important in my mind is an ongoing ability to review the formula. And so while the committee recommended convening a group every 2 biennium, so every other biennium, to evaluate and look at those changes, I imagine, especially with the initial rollout, that the presidents, the business officers, and even you will want to see, at least on that first element, that we'll continue to do this work immediately, because it's always difficult when you're rolling out a formula to begin with. And then most important, and again, as I started my comments, is that this was a funding formula review. It didn't look at funding. We also need to look at whether or not the funding that we have is adequate and it was equitable, and that we understand the relationship between the state support and our students' contribution. And so that RFP is, if it hasn't been released, it's being released momentarily, today probably. And so that RFP has been vetted, the charge with the business officers, and we've discussed it with the Council of Presidents as well. That our goal is to have this done before the session starts, so that we have that information. That information also, I've already asked both your chief of staff and the chair to get on the January 17th special meeting of the board, so that we can present those outcomes.
Thank you, Chair Carvalho. And just to be clear, the $2 million that we were given, we got a ruling from LCB that we could not use any of that $2 million to do this study. So my question to you, Chancellor, is how is that going to be funded and how much is it going to cost? Thank you.
So we anticipate that the process won't. Well, we've set a cap of $125,000. We are holding positions at the system office to pay for that. So while we need some resources, we understand, but we do want to respect the LCB's ruling on that. And so we need to move this forward, and we need to make sure that that information is in hand and that we engage our internal stakeholders on that process. And so again, that RFP was vetted with the business officers and discussed with the presidents, and so we'll be moving that forward. As I mentioned, if it's not out already, it's going out today. So, and we've got on the RFP committee, we've asked a university business officer, a community college business officer, and also an academic officer, as well as Vice Chancellor Vatone to serve on that committee to evaluate.
I just want to be clear, that was no hit on LCB. I mean, they interpret, you just have to be very, very clear and specific what you're asking for when you go to the legislature. So.
Right, and we appreciate everyone's support. We have kept the governor's finance office informed. We really appreciate Amy Stevenson, the director, serving on that committee. I think everybody's learned more about NSHE than they ever thought that they would, and I love that. I love that because I think our formula is very exciting. Other people don't agree, but we think that it's exciting, and that's why we don't take lightly the request that we are asking, and we know that this is going to be a heavy, heavy lift of asking for $21 million more per year. But it's important for our institutions. It's important for us to move forward. So I just appreciate both the governor's finance office and LCB for the engagement and for the relationship that we are building. And so we're very grateful. We will be returning a large portion of the appropriation that we received. We were very prudent in the expenditures. And so we're probably, of the $2 million, we're going to be returning $1.5 million is our estimate. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chancellor Vatone, who is going to walk through what the formula looks like, and again, refreshing it from each of those recommendations and how it is deployed throughout our funding.
Good morning, Chris Vatone, Chief Financial Officer. And so I'll try to speak loudly, and I will try to keep the pace to get through it. So, but let me know, please, if I'm going too fast or too slow. I do have quite a few tables, as the Chancellor mentioned. I'll try to get through them and focus on the highlights, because I do go through and kind of recover some of the ground, some of the territory that we've already went through, but just refreshing it as you look at each of the elements. So again, revisiting the main recommendations that actually affect what we're recommending in this biennial cycle, the adjustments to the calculations. So the first was the increase in the small institution factor from 100,000 weighted student credit hour threshold to 125, and the increasing that rate for inflation. And again, I think there was an earlier slide that referenced beginning July 1st, 26. It's actually FY 26, so July 1st, 25, both years of this biennial budget. And then breaking the allocation portion actually up into three components instead of 100% weighted student credit hours, but 75% weighted student credit hours, 10 on the student characteristics and 15 for performance. And here is that visually on the left-hand slide, the current formula or prior formula, where 100% is weighted student credit hours, and then of that 100%, 20% was set aside for performance having to be earned back, and that's where that really the main dislike of that approach was it's earning the same budget dollar twice. So again, the formula recommendations have two direct allocations that we call carve-outs. It's the small institution factor and the research operation and maintenance allocation. There was no change that came out of this work to the research allocation, the research facility allocation, because that allocation works quite differently. It's based on the institution's actual square footage and actual expenditures. So unlike the small institution factor, that number has had annual changes based on those changing elements. And so that one stays the same. It's still part of this recommendation, and you'll see that in the calculations. So to focus on the one that changes, the change in the approach, when we talk about that threshold, the funding for the small institution is based on the credit hours that fall between their actual weighted student credit hours and that threshold. So that's where it's a declining amount as the weighted student credit hours increase toward that threshold. And this recommendation adjusts those amounts from 30 to 40 and adds the HEPI inflation beginning in FY26. And what that looks like in numbers is on this slide. So again, the recommendation was to increase it to $40 and then add HEPI beginning in FY26. So that's what's in the top of this slide, and those HEPI figures are the same HEPI adjustments that are applied to the registration fees for this biennial cycle as well. So using that same HEPI, calculating those per weighted student credit hour values, you can see in the two tables below that, that's FY26 and FY27, and calling out in particular the impact for WNC, where, as the Chancellor mentioned, they just missed or just exceeded that 100,000 threshold, so their small institution factor would have go to zero. This change brings that funding back, and the combined change is about $2.2 million for each of the years. I don't need to explain the weighted student credit hours to this group, but the change from the committee recommendation, it's not making any change to how weighted student credit hours are calculated or how we're collecting them, but it just makes the change of reducing the allocation of the base funding from 100% based on weighted student credit hours to 75%. But the other change that was mentioned earlier is the current or historical formula uses the most recent count year as the basis for allocating the weighted student credit hour portion of the base budget. The committee recommended moving to a greater of 3-year average weighted student credit hours or the most recent count year. And the rationale behind that was two things. One was doing an every other year count year, always put emphasis on those even years. So there was no recognition for activity that would happen on the odd year. The 3-year average brings an odd year in, so it works at 3-year average. But when you look at a 3-year average, there's different effects on institutions based on whether their weighted student credit hours are increasing or decreasing. So the committee saw several options and landed on the greater of the 3-year average or the most recent count year. In this slide, I've highlighted for you how that works for the most recent set of data. And so you can see, with the exception of GBC, all the institutions actually have the higher counts in the most recent count year, but the higher of the 3-year average brings that higher number in for GBC in the distribution. I do appreciate there was a very sharp eye reviewing the slide, so there's a error there on the greater of column. So the column we're actually using here is the second to last column on the right. The CSN figure there should be the 592,720. The actual percentages are calculated based on that, so it's just an error in the number, but all the calculations you'll see are actually using the right percentages. The other, one of the new components is the student-based funding, where we're recognizing the importance of the headcount and the part-time students and bringing in populations such as the underrepresented minority and Pell-eligible students. And this calculation would allocate 10% of the total base based on this component. This slide to show you the how this calculation actually works or what the committee actually recommended based on the consultant's work and what was presented to them. When we talk about the populations, we're looking at both head count and credit hours as a measure of the part-time students and the full-time and the students themselves. And rather than looking at one count year or having the same concern about individual count years, this is looking at 3 years worth of data. So these numbers that you're looking at are 3 years cumulative head counts, 3 years cumulative credit hours for each of the institutions. And in both cases, you're counting all students that are underrepresented minority and students that are Pell eligible. So a student can be counted in here 3 times. They could be in each of the 3 columns to the extent they may fit in each of those 3 categories. After accumulating them and calculating the proportional numbers by institution for head count and credit hours, those 2 populations are then averaged into the numbers that you see in the far right of the slide. And so the far right of the slide represents the student-based allocation that we talk about when we get to the calculation. I'm going to pause in case there was any questions on that. Okay. The second new component is the outcome-based funding, which is essentially, it's not a direct replacement of the performance pool, but it's it is recognizing the importance of performance and the importance of accountability around the metrics. So it's this was where the committee landed on recognizing that the current performance pool doesn't work, but the accountability component of the metrics is still important, and the relative performance addresses some of the other concerns around how the performance pool worked with respect to meeting targets. So I'll show you here on the next slide. These were the benefits of the replacement of the model, again recognizing it's not a carve-out. So in this case, the allocation is determined as part of this budget allocation process based on relative performance. That allocation calculation is performed and the allocation is proposed as part of the funding. And so that's just like weighted student credit hours, that becomes the funding and it's earned and it's part of the budgets and does not have to be earned back. And also, because of the way that works, 100% of the performance funds are always allocated. There's no risk of losing performance funds once they're allocated. This table has a lot of numbers and percentages in it, and it is how the performance allocation is calculated. I'll try to simplify, I guess, the way it works. On the far left of the slide is the prior year outcome-based funding allocations. And so in this case, this represents the FY25 performance pool rather than this outcome-based funding because we don't have this outcome-based funding. So this is the 20% that was the current formula's performance-based funding allocations. And that second column is each institution's proportional share of that performance funding. Then in the middle 2 columns, you have the points earned in the current performance pool metrics. So the one recommendation in implementing this outcome-based funding is to continue to use the current metrics as the performance metrics, the performance data. We do have and we do recognize there's interest in revisiting those metrics and potentially replacing them. That's part of the ongoing formula review and assessment work that the Chancellor mentioned. So we know that is something that could change, but this is the metric data that we used and that the committee used for presenting this recommendation and modeling it. These are the same 2 years actually that were used for that work because we don't have the FY24 metric data finalized. The timing of collection of metric data is such that we would be with this 1-year lag. So, but the middle 2 columns are the campus's actual performance metrics on an individual basis. So the nature of the performance pool is that first you're determining your institution's performance growth year over year, and then we allocate the pool based on relative performance. So the column E, the column E there is calculating the institution's performance year over year. And column F is allocating their, or doing the relative performance adjustment to apply their proportional share of the performance funds to the total. And then because of that math, it does not work out to 100%. We normalize that to 100% proportionally based on the outcome of column F. A lot of math, a lot of numbers, but what this is doing is just it's allowing campuses to be first measured on their own performance and then allocated based on that performance proportionally to others. The benefits, one of the other benefits this approach accomplishes that was a loud and clear concern with the prior performance pool carve-out approach was that campuses had to achieve targets. So with changing demographics and changing environment that higher ed operates in, there was concern about these metrics being heavily focused on or heavily tied directly to enrollment. So that's because the performance metrics are largely, they are outcomes driven, but they are raw numbers. So the more enrollment you have, the more outcomes you'll have. This approach, if enrollments were to decline, performance may still increase or relative performance may be more consistent. So campuses will earn performance funding even if metrics decline. It's just what is the relative performance. So this has the opportunity for campuses to still receive and benefit from performance funds in both growing and declining environments. So pause there. That was a lot. If there's any questions before I move on. Okay. So again, now we'll get into just kind of how the calculations work when you look at the numbers to allocate the base formula. This slide is just showing you the top section is the instructional state operating state appropriation budgets that we reviewed at your August 23rd special meeting. This is the base budgets built using the base maintenance enhancement approach. So that formula adjusted base includes the roll up of the COLA allocations, the caseload adjustments that we looked at that meeting, and any other inflation adjustments that'll come in. Then we back out the small institution factor and the research O&M direct appropriations. Now remember, those are calculated first before we back them out, so we actually make an adjustment in the base as those go up or down. So when you adjust them and then back them out, the amount of the base that's going to go through the formula calculation is going to be the same, regardless of how those amounts are calculated. So the top part is calculating how much will go through the formula distribution, and the bottom part is showing you how that distribution is split among the three components that would now exist instead of 100% on weighted student credit hours. And this table is just so that you can see, we went through on each of the prior slides how to calculate each of these three components. This is just what those percentages look like, so that you can see how those percentages differ in the three components of the distribution. The far right column just being what the weighted effect of those three components is by institution. And this slide is showing how the calculation distributes the base funding among the three components. So now we're applying the actual available base for allocation through the formula by institution, adding back then the research and small institution adjustments or direct appropriations, and getting to the formula appropriation that would result from running the formula. And next slide, this is what this looks like when you compare the base maintenance enhancement approach appropriations to what the formula would result. So far left column is your base maintenance and enhancement that was, again, part of our August 23rd presentation. The next column being the increase to the small institution factor that was one of the recommendations in this item. So the middle column being that base maintenance, the formula, the base maintenance enhancement allocations that are now part of the formula distribution in this presentation. The next column, the column on the far right, being the formula developed or formula calculated appropriate allocation from the previous slide. And that column that's next to it being the difference between base maintenance and enhancement and the formula. Highlighted on here are the funding that would be needed to fully fund implementing this approach without it being at the expense of the R1 institutions, as you've heard those concerns. So the slide shows the impact of what a redistribution would be. That's they're the same numbers. That's why that nets to zero. The recommendation we have for you today is to add an item of special consideration to fund those impacts, to fund those increases without it being at the expense of the R1. So if what that would look like is just those two negatives with UNR and UNLV being zeros and the formula and base maintenance enhancement being the same.
We have a
I'll pause
question
there
from
for-
Regent Ariscata.
You somewhat answered my question. On the previous slide, what's the correlation with the allocation on that previous slide? Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you describe that one more time, please?
Yes, thanks, and thanks for the question. So the far right column of this slide is the outcome or is the result of running the formula. So it's taking that 691 million that runs through the calculation, applying it to the three components on the left-hand slide, part of the slide, adding back their research and small institution factor allocations to end up with the formula-derived allocation. So the far right column is the proposed new formula allocation. And then on this slide, that same column is that middle column, base maintenance enhancement allocation from the prior slide. So there's just a couple extra columns here because the small institution factor adjustment is also a new request in this slide deck. But that middle column is the formula calculation. No, I'm sorry. The far right column here is the formula allocation. The middle one is the base maintenance and enhancement pre-formula.
And CFO Baton, if you could please highlight that bottom number in the rectangle box.
Yeah, the 21.1 million is the sum of those highlighted cells that would be the funding needed to fully fund those adjustments without it being at the expense of the university. So again, part of this presentation, part of the request for your consideration is to add a item for special consideration to your budget request for the governor's office that would go through the legislature, 21.1 million annually in that biennial request.
Thank you.
And I just want to add that being on the committee, we spent hours with the consultants changing the numbers to be the least harmful to the R1s. Honestly, we did. And they said from a national lens and their expertise that our universities, in their opinion, were getting more than, of course, the community colleges. So that's why we went to this. So we all know we need more funding. Our chair knows we need more funding. I'm talking chair of our committee, our former Chief Justice, who really, really got an education on this. I think he's going to be one of our greatest advocates going into the legislative session. But so today, I mean, I was looking at that again too. That 21.1 million, we're going to need that each biennium to make all of us whole, every institution, helping the community colleges, but then not impacting our universities, which we know we can't make it to R1. I think, and we just have to really tell our story in this next legislative session. But it's going to be really important for us today to approve this formula change and then advocate for that 21.1 million per biennium. I mean, it's gonna be very important, so we're whole. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, per year
Per
of the
year,
biennium,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
per year, 2 years.
Yeah, no, and there was definitely, the committee's charge didn't allow for the committee to include in their recommendations a request for funding. It was limited to recommendations around the formula itself.
Yeah, yes,
But
your
we
point
heard-
is well
but we
taken,
heard
because
the-
we
we-
thought,
yeah.
when I got on this committee, I have to say, and I've said it a couple times, that I was really disheartened when I got on the committee, because the charge was so narrowly defined that there would be no new money. I mean, they beat it in our heads. I even said to the chancellor, I said, why are we doing this? This is just time wasted, it's whatever. I mean, I was very disillusioned. But I think at the end of the day, I have said that before, there's hope now. We know exactly where we are. Just to have the weighted student credit hours, I mean, we all know on this board, you can't do that when your community colleges are based on part-time enrollment. We've got as much as 76% at our community colleges. So the formula is not right for them at all. I tried really hard, being the advocate for ACCT that I am, to just separate our formulas. Let's have one for community colleges, let's have one for the universities. Why couldn't we? And the consultants did come back on that one and said, no, yeah, you're too small of a state. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, we're the customer, do what we want, but we didn't go that direction. So this is, I mean, really, I can't tell you how hard we worked at that we worked hard at all of them, but the last meeting was crucial when we came up with this. And President Dalpe, I was really glad you were the one on this committee, because you've been in the system the longest and you've been with the formula the longest. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this all came to be, because I know you struggle with your budget. And then I have to say, when former President Solis left Western Nevada College and he went to Texas, he has a school very similar in size to WNC, very similar. I still talk to him a lot. His budget is $62 million a year. His budget here at WNC is $22 million a year. I mean, that's a huge difference, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Regent DeCarlo, Kyle Dalpe, Western Nevada College, and I did share notes with former President Solis about that, 3 times the budget, same. And I know we won't be there because a lot of that has to do with the local tax base, but the talking through this process where there was going to be no new funding and allowed for that discussion, I think that the current slide that we're looking at shows that deficit and what would make the funding formula whole. I don't want to be, I wasn't in that meeting, none of us were in that meeting advocating for money being taken from one to the other, but when you have a formula that runs right now as a distribution of a set dollar amount, not as a funding based on caseload, which when we grow based on caseload, there's no additional allocation. And the previous version of the funding formula pre-2013, they always would negotiate at the legislature a percentage of 100%. So it would never be 100%. It would always be, it's going to be 85, 86, 87. And they never really funded it at 100% of what the caseload was. And so we do not want a situation where we are taking from one entity or 2 entities in this case and bringing it over to the other entities. What we want is to say this is how the formula should run, whether you call it a formula running or distribution, and to make it work under all the work we did on the funding formula committee, we need an extra $21.1 million per year to make up the deficit that is caused by the changing of the drivers, not that we're just shifting it from one to the other in any one given session, but this is a going forward discussion that because we changed the drivers, this amount will help make whole those ones that are showing a deficit up there and hopefully put in place a formula that is more equitable across all of the student population groups, which is why we're here. You mentioned 76%, and I think that's right about where we are in part-time students, and that's a big consideration. I'm just going to mention small institution factor unless there's any detailed questions. We crossed that 100,000 threshold. We are still a very small institution. We have 3 campuses, 164 full-time employees. We have to maintain a certain level of administrative structure per our accreditation and the ability to do our job. which is serving students. And even though we're over that, most of that, as was noted by the chancellor in her opening remarks, most of that is because the weighting in CTE is higher, but we still are a small infrastructure, even though we're offering more in the CTE realm, which drive the formula a little bit more because it's a 4 weighting. So we appreciate that adjustment in this because it does help us garner some of the extra funds to keep that minimal infrastructure going.
Regent Perkins and Regent Goodman have questions for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, my question was just answered, so thank you.
Regent Goodman?
Thank you. As a member of the committee, it was definitely an incredible learning process, and it was a very eye-opening. I think one of our main issues here is that we talk about how F1, Super Bowl, all of these different events are bringing so much money into our budget. One of our board members had mentioned that we just had a flush of extra $30 million this last fiscal year. And so I really think what we need to do is we need to express to the legislature just how important it is to fund our education. It's very difficult to go back every year and say, we need an extra 21 million, or we need an extra this. It really should be built into our budget. UNLV and UNR have worked so hard to become these R1 institutions that are doing such great work. To cut them at the knees is very it's not the right thing to do. And so yes, when we did this formula, we recognized that we needed to do better for our community colleges. At the same time, I felt very uncomfortable taking money from our R1 institutions. And so I don't know how we work this into it so that we say we want this extra money to be included every year so that no one takes a hit. But I think it's imperative for us to recognize that going back every year and asking for that extra funding is difficult. And I just want to add one more point. Maybe it's a soapbox thing, but when it comes to education, I sit on the Nevada State Board of Education, and we had an incredible presentation from Guy Hobbs. And basically, when we're even just looking at K through 12, by the year of 2035, if we continue funding the way that we're funding, we will be $2.5 billion short compared to what national averages are. I would love to kind of sit down and wonk out on some of this stuff, what it means for higher education, but we've really got to start thinking about we can talk about education, we can talk about pathways, we can talk about workforce, but if we don't have the money to put these things into place, it's just talk. And so I think we really need to do better and be articulate when we speak with our legislators as we go up there and talk about how all this is going to do. You spend money to make money, and that's how it's going to be. If we put this money into our students, into our state, we are going to get it back tenfold. Thank you.
Thank you. I realize CFO Vitone, you have a few more slides, so we can continue.
Sure. And so I guess I would start first by offering, this request is to add the 21.1 annually to the base. So it would not, should this be funded, the recommendation is for it to be part of the base going forward, not an annual. This is not a one biennium fix that would revert. So just wanted to show this next slide. This is just taking those numbers from the prior slide and converting it to per FTE numbers for you, just so you can see the relative what the relative allocations look like. Because there was a lot of numbers changing on the prior slide, so I just thought this would help kind of put that a little bit in perspective and be able to see how those numbers once adjusted compare. So what you have on the far left is the annual average FTE from academic year 24. And then you have in the middle there, that is just the state appropriation before and after the formula. Left first being base maintenance enhancement, second being formula. And again, in this case, the numbers reflect as if the UNR and UNLV appropriations declined with the request. That would not be, that the result would be the same because we would balance that out. Then the far right columns, the two columns, represent the pre-formula and post-formula when you also include the student fee budgets that are part of the state-supported operating budgets also. So it's the other revenues part of the state-supported operating budgets that you saw a couple weeks ago. And then just to kind of wrap it up, the Chancellor's Office recommendations, this slide, you'll recognize it looks like the committee's recommendations because it is the committee's recommendations on the formula. And the additional recommendation from us for your consideration is the item for special consideration of 21.1 million annually that we would add to our agency request for the governor's office. And so we have for your request today, for your consideration, the accepting the formula committee's recommendations and the additional request for our agency request.
Thank you. I have a question from Regent Brooks, and then Regent Arascata, and then Regent Vice Chair Downs and Regent Cruz Crawford.
Thank you, Chair Carvalho. Not so much a question as just a statement, and it's been said several times today already. The amount of work that went into this, I think, was tremendous. I think our CFO, Chris Vuitton, you're the perfect person to lead some of this when it comes to the numbers. I would say that you're a wizard with numbers after working with you so closely on the investment committee and some of the other things that you do with the system. It's really great that you're a part of all the things that are going on. I think Interim Chancellor Patty Charlton did a fantastic job with working with members of this committee. There were certainly, it was a great group of committee members that certainly have different political ideologies in terms of where higher education funding could sit. And it was just fantastic that everybody could come to the table and work together. And it was great that our previous Vice Chancellor, Crystal Abba, was really a part of some of the mechanics behind this. And so there's certainly a lot of thanks to go out from not only just the committee members, but the people who really were instrumental in making sure that we can get some of the work done. The general fund appropriations, after SIF, the 75, 10, 15 percentage numbers, while I to this day don't have any buyer's remorse in bringing those numbers forward as we were taking a look at what it would do to some of the institutions, there are certainly some considerations in where we still are going to have enrollment competition. And I think as we began this committee in terms of what the funding formula may look like, there were just some things that we were hoping to be able to achieve from this committee. There were some things that we fell just a little bit short on, but again, I guess there's only so much stuff we can do with what we were working with. But I know that college readiness was something that we were hoping to take a look at inside of this. Certainly mission differential was something we were hoping to take a look at as well. And while there were a few things that didn't get addressed, I do hope that as we move forward and we're speaking with our legislators, that we get their support in adopting some of the things that we're bringing forward in terms of our recommendations. And again, I just want to say it was a great experience to be on the committee and work with so many fantastic people and trying to figure out what we could do for funding for higher education. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Regent Arascata.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chair. And Regent Brooks just actually pointed out one of the objects I was going to discuss was the enrollment and the enrollment competition, not necessarily competition, but competitiveness of enrollment and the numbers how it would factor in to the entire algorithm or metric. If possible, CFO Vuitton, can you go back 3 slides from the very end just to benefit not just the dais, but the entire audience, if that's possible?
Tell me when to stop.
3 from the very end. Keep going.
I might have gone too far.
Nope, keep going. It's the 3rd one from the end. Okay, you kind of flew out. You have to go back one.
This one?
I apologize. 3rd one from the very end. Keep going. apologize to all. But you flew over it really quick. It was the third one from the very end.
Is it recommendations or
There we
the
go.
title?
Okay,
That one, or
there we go.
the action one?
I don't know.
I'm
Whatever's
sorry.
the third one from the very end. I apologize, sir, and everyone. There we go. Chancellor's Office's recommendation. Thank you very much. So one of the items is that you really went over this, and you went over it actually quite swiftly. And I don't feel that there was enough recognition to this slide and the following slide. Under number 2, to be exact, the 75 allocated used in the weighted student credit hour, the 75, 10, 15. This is imperative for the system and for the benefit of the system. Do you feel that this and the additional 21.1 million that's going to be requested on an annual basis, this will put the Nevada system of higher education into the positive trajectory monetarily to be sustainable for all the colleges, all the universities from now on, or for quite a while?
Let's see, the chancellor might want to.
If I could, for the record, Patty Charlton, Chancellor. So Regent Ariscotta, that's a great question. So, I think with where we have come out with the formula adjustment, I think that this is a good starting place. I think that the adequacy and the equity piece that we are engaging and we are pursuing right now is absolutely vital to answer the question that you have asked. And it's not just what money do we need, but what is that contribution and how does that look in the state support and the student support as well? And so looking at where we are as a whole. And so I think that those 2 points, I think this is a good place for where we are. And it was very difficult and very painful to get to this place because you can't run this formula, especially based on the pie model and what came out of that legislative language, which was a formula-only study, and it's how you distribute that pie. That was very difficult for all of us. And so then to take into account this other study, and most importantly, the continued opportunity to review where we are, because dynamics will change. The students, the institutions will change. And so to be able to come back and review this on an ongoing basis with you and with the institutions is absolutely vital. So I think that, yes, we're on a good path for that trajectory with all of those pieces combined.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
if you can go one more slide, please, CFO Vuitton. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that Vice Chair Downs is going to relinquish his time to Regent Del Carlo, and then we'll go to, I don't know, are you ready for that? Or do you have questions? Okay, then we'll go to Regent Cruz Crawford.
Regent Cruz Crawford, for the record. CFO Fatone, thank you so much for all your work and the committee. I know funding formulas take a lot of work and they're never perfect. I know a mentor of mine, Senator Dennis, worked for a decade on the K through 12 funding formula, and it was never quite right until it was right enough. And, as we work through these processes, I just want to thank the committee, and what an honor to better understand, like, what better class in education did we give all of those community members on what we need. So as we go in, I want to make sure that we're really taking care of, our rural institutions. I remember going and touring GBC, Ely, and I was asking, how many nurses do you have on this campus? It was a beautiful campus, and I think they said they graduated 4 that year that I went and toured. on the actual campus. And I was like, gosh, they have this whole campus and it's only 4. And they told me that was enough to take care of the entire community. And so just understanding, how we are, disproportionately sometimes giving funding. So I just want to thank the committee for the work because it's hard, because it's never perfect. And so thank you for that. I did want to talk a little bit about as we go forward and we ask for this funding. I know 0.1 million seems like a lot of money. But I have an elementary school campus and my budget this year or last year, I haven't got my budget this year yet, was $5.5 million. So think, I don't have to pay for facilities, but everything outside of facilities. So when you're thinking about how we look at higher ed and the impact on our state, we need to start looking at it in that lens of we do not have enough students going to school that are fulfilling the gap and need that we need for professions right now. And so we need to change our mindset on how we look at higher ed. And we have to also know that education, whether we like it or not, is directly, the level of education attainment is directly tied to the economic health of our state. And so we're not asking for 21.1 million. We are letting them lend it to us so that we can give it back in state revenue. Every single person in the state that pays for taxes to fund higher ed. And so we have to remember that this is our money, this is our community money, and we need to choose how we spend that. And so I really want everybody that really gets it to be the voice for this is our money and we need this money to make a better Nevada and just change our perspective a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you ready? Okay.
Yes, I'm ready to make a motion to accept the recommendations related to revising the current NSHE funding formula and approval of the resulting allocation of state funds to the teaching institutions for the purpose of the 2025 to 2027 biennial NSHE state operating budget.
Thank you for that.
Second.
Actually, I have a motion from Regent Del Carlo and a second from Regent McMichael.
Madam Chair, if I don't mind interjecting, I believe the Chancellor may have a recommendation insofar as the supplemental piece of it.
Yes.
Okay.
If it could be accepting the recommendations of the committee and the allocation of those percentages, but adding that, if we could move
Okay,
it to
let me
that
just,
other
my
item.
emotion, and I'll just amend that to include the $21.1 million per year. Thank you.
Thank you. And Regent McMichael, you approve that clarification?
Yes.
Thank you. So at this time, I know that that there are some comments from others out there. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. At this time, I'm going to offer the time to President Deal at UNR. He's asked to speak on this, and I'll open it up to if there is anybody from leadership of faculty or presidents who would like to speak on this. I'll open the floor to you as well. So President Deal.
Thank you very much. Dawson Deal, President of the Associated Students of the University of Nevada, for the record, and I'm behind President Hilgersum if you're looking for me. Hello. I know we've had a lengthy discussion on this, but I just wanted to provide some student voice on the topic, especially from an R1 institution. So first, I want to express my deep appreciation for the work done by the committee. The proposed funding formula very rightfully prioritizes directing much needed resources to our community and state colleges, which are crucial in expanding as we mentioned, access to higher education throughout the state, and are vital for workforce development and serve as these crucial pathways for students to achieve both their academic and professional goals. But at the same time, and it sounds like many regions understand the importance of this, but I would urge the board to prioritize the importance of maintaining this robust funding for our R1s, especially the University of Nevada, as both a minority serving institution and emerging Hispanic serving institution. The university supports an increasingly diverse student body from across the state and our nation. And it's essential that we do not lose this momentum that we've built in pursuing and emerging opportunities that reflect the needs of these communities. So continued investment in these institutions is crucial, and not only to advance the research and innovation that takes place on our campuses, but also to ensure the comprehensive support services that are critical for student success among all demographics that we rely on a daily basis. So striking a balance between these, between adequately funding these community and state colleges and ensuring the continued strength of our R1 institutions is so key to fostering this dynamic and equitable higher education system throughout our state. So each of our institutions plays a distinct and valuable role, and by finding this balance, which I think we've found a good solution for, I think we can really build a system that serves all students in the best way possible. So thank you for your time and consideration. I appreciate it.
Thank you, President Deal. Is there anybody from Faculty Senate leadership? Chair Connor, would you like to make any comments or open it up to any? Okay, thank you. President Osorio Hernandez.
Thank you. I did just want to touch very quickly. I was one of the students who did offer some input to the committee as well with our previous chair, Susanna Stancute. And I'm glad to see that, there was some consideration with funding summer schools as well. We did have a previous conversation earlier this morning about it. But one of the things that I just really wanted to touch on as well is that I think the committee did move in the right direction with student attributes and headcounts. But of course, in the same sentiment that there seems to be that there needed to be some other type of work on final calculations, especially with the R1s, is similar to the sentiment that President Dio had made. And, they were a lot of huge multi-million-dollar cuts, right? So I think it was a step in the right direction, and just wanted to further emphasize that this was some of the input that we also provided as students.
Thank you. I'll open the floor to any presidents if they'd like to make any comments. President Sandoval?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Vice Chair, members, our Board of Regents. Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno. I also want to join in thanking the committee and its hard work. And as we've seen today, this is very complicated. And I don't want to repeat what has already been said because I think it's been really thorough and provocative. I suppose my only comments are these, and I think one of the wins of this committee is the recognition that as our campuses evolve, so must the formula. And we can't be using an obsolete, I shouldn't call it obsolete, but a formula that was developed in a time that is very different than we are now. The other comment that I have is just a caution, is I don't want this recommendation to create the impression that even if the hold harmless were funded, that the overall funding for the Nevada system of higher education is sufficient. If this recommendation were to come in and the legislature were to approve it to the tune of the 42 million, they might say we're done. And again, the overall and over time, the overall funding for higher ed has been diluted. And so again, I really appreciate the work of the committee. This is going to be a challenging session. We could talk about that for a while, probably in a future meeting. But those are my comments, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. President Whitfield.
For the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. I should know better than to try to follow President Sandoval. He is so articulate and so thoughtful about this. I think the only thing that I would try to add to this is something actually that Regent Cruz Crawford said, which is that as we go through and try to petition for this, and we're talking about, these are big dollars. It's 42 million across the biennium. The other part of the conversation has to be, and I trust that my colleague is probably going to do the same thing that I'm going to do as we talk to legislators, is not to make it seem like that this is some kind of gimme to NSHE, that it's really about how our institutions actually contribute significantly to the well-being of this state economically. And that in particular, and this is the part sometimes that's maybe not as clear, and that is what is the benefit of an R1? I see this across the country, that we're not doing a good enough job of actually saying what an R1 actually contributes, both to students, to employers, to economies, to research, to innovation, to all of those things. And so I think that it is upon us to make sure that in this next legislative session, for all of us to be able to really think very, very clearly and cogently about how to argue the benefit of higher ed, and in particular, the additional contributions that the R1s make. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Hilgersom?
Hi, President Hilgersom.
President Hilgersom, I'm
Thank
sorry.
goodness. Anyway, first of all, I just want to say also that I'm very grateful to the committee. I think this is really good work. It's very difficult work. In addition to the complexity of the funding formula in the state of Nevada, and I've never seen anything like it, and I've been around for 38 years in community colleges. So it was also just the recognition that we do have different missions. And at the community college level, I think what I'm most thankful for is not just the recognition for part-time students, but the recognition that supporting students who are extremely diverse, particularly in their academic readiness and their academic preparedness, is not a cheap endeavor. It's not free. And it really does take resources, extra staffing, creativity, all of those things, so that we can really lift people up from where they're at. And at the predominantly two-year colleges, many of our students need so much help, but it's transformative. It really is transformative. And when we help them, they can do really great things in their lives and their careers. And I know it because I've worked with thousands of students in my career, and I've seen where they can go with the help of a predominantly two-year community college. So I'm also very thankful, and I think this is definitely moving in the right direction for the state of Nevada. Yes, there's more to be done, but this is an excellent start. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I think we should take a roll call vote. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go to Chancellor Charlton, and then we'll take a roll call vote.
If it's okay if I could speak after the vote, for a reason.
Of course. Okay.
Regent Brown,
Yes.
Chair Carvalho,
Yes.
Regent Cruz Crawford,
Yes.
Regent Del Carlo,
Yes.
Vice Chair Downs,
Yes.
Regent Goodman,
Yes.
Regent McMichael,
Yes.
Regent Perkins,
Yes.
Regent Tarkanian, thank you, Regent Tarkanian, Regent Ariscata,
Yes.
Regent Boylan,
Aye.
Regent Breaker,
Yes.
and Regent Brooks.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chancellor Charlton.
Thank you. Patty Charlton, Chancellor, Nevada System of Higher Education, for the record. I want to thank the board very much for that vote and for your support of the committee's recommendation and your support of our institutions. This is going to be hard work, And I know that this is going to be very difficult. And so I know that the presidents understand this. We have to speak with one voice. And this, along with your other priority related to public safety, we've heard a lot about that. We know that the resources are going to be highly competitive, but I think telling our story, I would state that the word robust is not a word that should be used as we're defining or describing the funding. And I appreciate that we've lost ground over the years in my 30 some years with the system. But the work that is done in the research base, the work that is done preparing a workforce, what our institutions do is special. It's very special. And so I think telling our story, speaking with one voice, I hope that we can bring this across the finish line. We will need to look at other things that we've prioritized. I have to be honest, and I think that's important. But I appreciate this board's vote. I have to thank the committee. It was very, very difficult as we went through the process, and my staff in particular, our research staff, and Vice Chancellor Vitone. I think he's learned more in just those last 10 months. Remember, it's only been 10 months since we started this work. And then an absolute huge appreciation to Crystal Abba and Heidi Hartz, who guided the project work extensively. We have a lot more to do. And so I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support today.
Thank you. Next, we will move on to item number 21, which had been item number 15, disposition of real estate located at 7000 East Russell Road, Las Vegas, Nevada, UNLV Sam Boyd Stadium, and adjacent property. And for this, I will go to President Whitfield.
Thank you, Chair. And for the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. Before I begin, I would like to make a small correction to the briefing paper on this agenda item on pages 1 and 7. The assessor's parcel number is incorrectly stated as 16226801001, and the actual correct parcel number should be 16126801001. So Sam Boyd Stadium, it has been a fabric of the history of UNLV for football games, for tailgates, for concerts, countless other events being held there for over 40 years. However, the time has now come to be able to transition ownership, and we're doing so with gratitude and partnership with Clark County. But let me share just a little bit of background about how we got where we are here today for this information-only item. In the process of construction and planning of Allegiant Stadium, UNLV secured a contract to use the venue, that venue for our football team, creating an incredible opportunity for UNLV football and for the Rebel community. I will remind you even of the price tag of that particular stadium. It's a $2 billion stadium, and I would argue that in some ways UNLV is able to play in maybe one of the best stadiums in the country in terms of its stature and whatever. It's been incredible. Under the terms of that stadium contract agreement, UNLV is no longer, however, permitted to operate Sam Boyd Stadium. Additionally, UNLV does not have any future plans for the stadium, so we believe that the most reasonable approach is to collaborate with our community partner, Clark County, to return Sam Boyd Stadium back to them. Due to the deed and revisionary restrictions on the stadium land parcels, which mandate that the property is to be used for public purposes, the pool of potential acquirers is actually pretty limited, making Clark County one of the few parties that can take over the stadium. UNLV and Clark County have been engaged in ongoing discussions since 2019 about the future of Sam Boyd Stadium. Discussions related to the disposition have included a $5 million payment from Clark County for the transfer of the stadium. UNLV has commissioned appraisals of the Sam Boyd Stadium property, and while these appraisals assume demolition of the existing improvements have been between $10.4 and $11.7 million, we believe that the $5 million value to transfer the property to Clark County is very reasonable based on a couple of different factors. Those being Clark County transferred the property to UNLV in 1985 at no cost. And although UNLV has undertaken valuable improvements to the property since then, we believe that a reduction of the appraised value transfer is reasonable considering the property's original no-cost transfer. The proposed transfer is seen as a continuation of the past collaborations between UNLV and Clark County, such as the transfer of 9.1 acres in 2016 for the Kirk Kerkorian School of Medicine's Medical Education Building. The proceeds from that transfer are planned to be reinvested in ways that align with NSHE's core objectives, including improving campus infrastructure and enhancing student support services. This aligns with strategic goals of increasing access, success, closing the achievement gap, and supporting workforce development and research. We've been engaged with Clark County Commissioner Jim Gibson in discussions of this disposition, and he's expressed his full support of that of the proposed approach. Now, to further speak on this disposition and our good faith relationship, Commissioner Gibson actually is joining us from the NSHE South Building, along with Lisa Kremer, the Deputy Commissioner, as well as Kevin Schiller is actually here up north, and he's the Clark County Manager, so he's in the audience as well. But let me do this. Let me stop here and turn over the floor to Commissioner Gibson to provide some of his thoughts. Commissioner?
Good morning, and thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board, for allowing me to come forward this morning on behalf of Clark County to indicate our alignment, our complete alignment with UNLV as we undertake to consider what the future might be for the property and the facilities at Sam Boyd Stadium. Sam Boyd Stadium lies within District G, which is my district. Most of UNLV lies within my district as well. And it has been an important part of my service to work collaboratively with the university in an effort to overcome a number of challenges that we've had in the past. Most recently, we've been working on two projects that are especially important, we believe, to the university. One is the work that we're doing along Maryland Parkway, the frontage to the university. And we think that we're going to create an environment there where the campus will be set in a completely different format in terms of community planning, simply by redesigning and then redeploying assets in a way that will encourage and strengthen the reputation in terms of the visual representation of the campus from Maryland Parkway. A few years ago, we decided that we had to move forward on another project, which was enabling traffic to get away from, after they land, 46 million visitors who come to town at Reed International Airport. The first draft of our proposal was an engineer's draft, and it was a really straightforward approach, just do a flyover ramp. Problem was, as we learned later, that it nearly blocked the entire view of the campus, and in particular the landmark that is at that intersection. And so we set about the business of trying to figure out another way to do it. While it's not essential to consideration of this item, I think it helps illustrate the way that we are aligned with the university. We have figured out how to underground some of Tropicana Avenue in an effort to not spoil the view of the landmark at that intersection. The cost of doing another way has been, we estimate, or will be, between $50 and $100 million. But it's our commitment to an institution that is essential to the success of this entire community and to the state of Nevada, as has been indicated by others. So we're proud to be able to sit in support of the work that's being done by UNLV and all of the assets that they have, and we appreciate very much the way that we've been able to work together since 2019. I've been in those discussions since that time to figure out how we deal with the issues that we have at Sam Boyd Stadium. The $5 million commitment was easy for us in the sense that there's been an ongoing maintenance obligation that UNLV has borne over the course of these years since the stadium became the facility for UNLV football. And it is our sense, and we have characterized that payment not as a purchase, but we've characterized it as the consideration for this transaction coming from a reimbursement of maintenance expenses that have been forwarded by UNLV over the course of time. Now, there are a lot of details to the transaction that others will talk about. I often think I know the details, but I know better than to claim that on this transaction. Let me just say that we appreciate very much the opportunity to stand before you and indicate our support and encourage you to consider this matter at an appropriate time when it is properly before you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Gibson, and thank you and Ms. Kremer and Mr. Schiller for being with us today and essentially spending a good part of your morning here with us. I appreciate your patience as we get through some other business, and especially your willingness to come here today to represent Clark County. I'd like to go to Regent Breger.
Thank you so much. Susan Breger for the record. Thank you both for being here, and to County Manager Schiller up north there. You know, for me, it was an honor to serve on the County Commission for 12 years and see, you know, how they work and how they care. And so this to me is really an amazing partnership to move on through this ability of the $5 million. Not only lets it come off of our plate for the 500 to probably $1 million that we've spent each year on this over the last multiple years. Also, the one thing that I want to make sure that happens, even though that money is UNLV money, I would like to make sure that the board is not only advised, but votes on what the appropriate ways to have that spent. And I think that would be very important when this comes back as an actual voting agenda item. But I do want to let the county know that I appreciate having been able to speak with you to find out your thoughts. And I do think that the 5 million, especially with the reversion clause, is very gracious. And I think that's what we need to look at. The reversion clause, they could give us 0. And if we didn't want to accept that, it would just be continue to sit there with our obligations to maintain the property, make sure it's secure. So I think the quicker we do this, the better it is, and a better way to continue to have good relationships with our major partner, quite frankly, within the state of Nevada. So thank you, everyone. And I hope when this comes back for a vote, we can support it wholeheartedly and know that it's the best thing that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Breger. Mr. Schiller, would you like to say a few words?
For the record, Kevin Schiller, Clark County Manager. Thank you for having me. I know this is not a voting action item. To follow up with Commissioner Gibson, I won't reiterate everything he has indicated. I'm a proud product of the University of Nevada system, both in the north and now in the south. I would like to echo a couple things. One, as the regional entity, as Regent Breger talked about, very significant to us in terms of how we utilize that property and can partner. I think that's going to be a significant component. A couple things I'll just echo. One is infrastructure needs. So when you look at the stadium itself, as you guys are aware, we're building a supplemental airport in terms of economic drivers, which has a statewide benefit. But the secondary piece I would echo is kind of water reclamation. Some of those pieces, there's some availability there. So that's one side of the conversation. But I think the larger side is how we utilize that property for public purpose. It gets complicated when you talk about BLM and you talk about leases. But what I will say to you is, in speaking and follow up to Commissioner Gibson and also having spoken to many commissioners, the investment as this moves forward will be significant. And I think you will see a direct public benefit to it. So just want to echo that.
Thank you. Yes, Regent Brown.
Hi, Regent Brown for the record. That actually made me think of a quick question. So I know UNLV, I think the time span was 10 years that they couldn't operate or have events at Sam Boyd Stadium because of the Allegiant deal. That doesn't carry over in perpetuity, right? If we sell it, you guys are free and clear to hold events there or do whatever you want with the property?
It's complicated, but I think to answer the question directly, no. So I think what we would be doing is in terms of the kind of the rebirth of how we would utilize that. I think we're still evaluating from a stadium purpose use. It gets complicated. There's a waterfall that happens with the Raiders funding, which is a significant component of that. So we work in concert to determine how best to utilize that. But I think from as Commissioner Gibson indicated, we started on this in 19. I've worked on it pretty consistently for about the past 2 years. I think what you will see in terms of how we utilize the space in those pieces, obviously from a liability perspective, from kind of the university side is one side of the discussion. I think what we want to do is essentially, and then we'll kind of take on the bureaucracy side of the next steps with reversionary clause and those types of pieces. But obviously, I think some of that will shift, and then we'll just move it forward. But we haven't really determined ultimately kind of what the uses would be. There's been lots of discussion, which is kind of why I kept it in that public purpose forum tied to the specific requirements.
Thank you. It was more just situational awareness, but I appreciate that answer.
Thank you. Regent Air.
Thank you. And this is directed to President Whitfield. With the transition to Allegiant Stadium and the understandable emptiness or lack of occupancy at Sam Boyd, could you describe some of the theft, or has there been any unauthorized occupants of the stadium? And or what's the current expense coming out of UNLV's wallet for the stadium?
Thank you, Regent Air Scott. And for the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. I don't have the list, but it has been considerable. One of the first things I think that we experienced is that people went, I think it was multiple visits by some bad doers to take the copper that's out. It's one of the things in terms of resale on whatever market it is. Actually, there was that. More recently, and I think that this has been a bigger issue in the valley, is the extreme heat has made that one of the places that some of the homeless people actually go to. And so we are having to provide additional security to be able to make sure that there is nothing that's going to go on and happen. Actually, Mr. Schiller mentioned one of the most important things, which is about the liability of what if something does actually happen out there. And so we've tried to cover that and address that with additional security, but it's a losing proposition. I think a low end is about a $500,000 per year for security, for doing the basic kinds of maintenance just to make sure the place doesn't fall in on itself. All of those things go into this calculation, and it's one of the reasons why, as you can imagine, ends up being an extremely good opportunity for us because we can't use it. We did use it one time since 2019, which was for a graduation. And actually, there was some concern that we weren't even supposed to use it for that. But our argument was that it wasn't for the purposes of generating revenue, and so we were able to actually use it. But other than that, we've really not used it for much of anything else. And so, building in the point that you're raising, which is about kind of the liability and the danger issues, this is something that is very, very positive, I think, for both sides.
Thank you. Any other discussion from Regents?
It's Regent Brooks for the record, Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I greatly appreciate that that county commissioner would come in and explain some of the process to us, and certainly that we are, I think, in debt of some thanks for coming in and ensuring that at least the campus will receive something for that facility. The question I have, and I'm just trying to work through this, President Whitfield, it feels like we're being saved a little bit here by the county, and what I'm wondering was there some perhaps opportunities that just weren't forecasted even years ago to do something with the property in terms of either sales or other type of development?
For the record, Keith Whitfield, President of UNLV. Thanks for that question, Regent Brooks. Yes, there have been a couple of groups that have approached us about Sam Boyd when they understood what the relationship with Allegiant Stadium is. But those are things that weren't for public purpose. And, you know, that is one of the lines that definitely has to be towed. And so, again, the number of people that will actually use the property for what it was originally gifted to us from the county makes those offers that are viable really not be able to be viable. I think actually Commissioner Gibson has helped me understand truly the scope of what public purpose ultimately means. And so we didn't see anyone else that actually stood up and offered that. And I guess I go back to the additional piece of that. This was an original gift from Clark County. And I think that, you know, even if there was a way to make some more money, Commissioner Gibson brought up just a couple of things that the county has done for us. And so this is kind of like fair payback in terms of balancing out the gifts, the investment, the support that we've gotten from the county. And it does provide us some reclamation for the amount of money that we've been spending since we've not been able to use the facility. Does that answer your question, sir?
I appreciate that. It certainly answers some of the things that I was considering, you know, that have to do specifically with Sam Boyd, the land, and everything else. And perhaps I'm glad this is information only, and perhaps there's some more discussions that we can have, just so that there's some further explanation in terms of some of the things that have corresponded the last couple of years to get us to where we are today. So I thank you for your time, President Whitfield.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, I just want to say thank you again, Mr. Schiller, Commissioner Gibson, and Ms. Kremer for being with us today. We look forward to continued discussions and moving forward with this with this reversion of this property. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know we've been sitting for quite a while, so before we go on to our final items, we are going to take a very quick 5-minute break. So we'll be back at 10:46. Okay, we are going to get started. So if everybody can please take your seats. We're going to finish the last few items on the agenda so that we can finish this meeting. So the next item on our agenda is committee reports. And since we are approving all of the committee reports, I would like to take all of them together, which would be items 22 through 27. But before we make a motion on that, I'd like to invite Regent Cruz Crawford to make her disclosure.
Yesterday, we made Regent Cruz Crawford, for the record, approved for Nevada Cooperative Extension. The school that I work at is a big partner with Nevada Cooperative Extension. So related to item 4 on the Audit Compliance Title 9 Committee and pursuant to NRS Chapter 281A, I disclose that my school receives cooperative extension programming. Because of the independence of judgment, a reasonable person would not be materially affected. I will vote on item 24 of the committee chair's report.
Okay. Thank you for that disclosure.
If you're ready, Madam Chair.
Yes, please, Regent Perkins.
Regent Perkins, for the record, I would like to make the motion to approve items number 22 through 27, including the disclosure from Regent Cruz Crawford.
Thank you for that
Second.
motion. I have a second from Regent McMichael. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? That motion carries. Item number 28, new business. Is there any new business from Regents? Regent Brown.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Regent Brown for the record. For new business, I'd like to explore implementing monthly mandatory cybersecurity training across the system in conjunction with CSC recommendations.
Thank you. Regent Boylan.
Thank you, Chair. My new business has got to do especially with the security and how to fund it. I'd like to propose, like I did last time, I proposed a governance committee. Haven't heard anything about that still, but it doesn't happen overnight, I know. But this is an ad hoc committee to find ways to streamline and cut costs across the board and turn it into a standing committee of the board eventually. And that's my new business. And in my new business, as part of that, I have a suggestion as part of new business, how we could make the extra income for security across NSHE. And I propose that most of this travel that's done by board members, board staff, admin, etc., stop. Let's stop doing that because we have modern technology and we have the Zoom connections, etc. And we are NSHE, an education institution. We should be using the technology that's provided to us. I think that money could be used to help for security.
Regent Boylan, I'm very, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as
Yes, ma'am.
has been stated in the past, please keep your new business to just concise points of what you would like to see on new business in the future. Thank you.
These are concise points that I'm saying we need to.
I
save
think what you're
money.
doing right now is discussing it. I'm truly trying to be respectful here. Just please state your points and we can move on. Thank you.
Ma'am, we've been through this before and a discussion is between two people. I'm not discussing this with anybody. I'm making my statements as it says I can do in new business. It does not mean that I cannot speak up and give background on it. This is the background. It is part of it. It's in the NRS, it's in our bylaws. So I'm not discussing with anybody. I don't need anybody to discuss this with me. I'm stating these facts, these ideas for new business. And we could save money.
I'm
Why
happy
does it
to
come-
have legal weigh in on this.
Legal way, please.
Yeah, just thank you, Chair Regent Boylan. Just echoing what the chair reiterated. As you are all aware, the new business item is limited to description and clarification of the subject matter of the item. So thank you.
Thank you. And that's what I'm doing. I'm clarifying the subject matter of the item. I'm not discussing this with anybody. This is simple English. It's one simple word, discussing and stating. So I'm not discussing this, Chair. I have no idea why every time I speak up and try to talk about difficult things, we heard all the instructors, professors talk about the safety and nothing. We don't want to do anything because these are difficult things. I'm giving a suggestion. Well, we could stop travel. What is this free on the taxpayers' dime? There's no need for everybody to come up here or to go to every meeting. Now that's difficult. So that's my new business, that we look into it, whoever looks into it, whether it's the board ad hoc committee or the chancellor, it's a way. I'm trying to give you ideas how to fund our security for the whole of NSHE.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Regent Del Carlo.
Thank you, Chair Carvalho. I have two items I'd like to have considered, and the first one is we have regents that are appointed or elected to other boards, and such as the State Department of Education, the Spring Reserve Board, ACCT, AGB. I would like to have just an agenda item, like 3 minutes per person, to give us an update. We you go out and do that and you would never hear what they're doing. So I would like to do that in the future. And then also, every 2 years, we know we're going to have new regents. I am requesting that you form a small ad hoc committee to review our onboarding of new regents. It's so critical that we onboard people properly. And I have a lot of ideas for it. I'd love to be on that committee. And I just think we need to have input from new members and be able to have some requirements for onboarding. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Cruz Crawford.
Regent Cruz Crawford for the record, and I really like that suggestion with the onboarding, also including the diversity, inclusion, and belonging training on that, and the preventing of harassment and discrimination Title IX training. I'd love that to be part of that onboarding process.
Thank you. Any other new business?
Hi, Regent Brooks for the record, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This may be unusual for me, but I've got a couple of new business suggestions. One, bring forward a policy regarding post-tenure review that's linked to effective teaching, and a revision for policy regarding the termination of tenured faculty. The second is bringing forward a discussion for possible action regarding the sunset date for the IDEA committee. And the third would be to ensure timely, effective, and transparent dialogue, bring forward a discussion for policy that coincides with current legislative policy regarding OML specific to Section 2 of NRS Code 241016. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other new business, before I open up public comment, I do want to extend another thank you to President Dalpy and everybody who's put the work into making this meeting happen. I know that this is a heavy lift, and I have a whole list of people who I'd like to recognize. So, of course, President Dalpy, our campus partners at WNC, Tracy Mendables, Shannon Covey, Wendy Anderson, Ron Beller, Melody Dooley, Amy Galeri, Winnie Kortmeyer, Heather Riccolo, and all of the student workers who helped everybody around campus while we were here. They were wonderful. From Computing Services, Diego Flores, Songhai Lee, Randy Miller, and Troy Wadsworth. From Custodial, Steve Orand, Christopher Fillmore, Linda Gassaway, Maribel Macias, Robert Martinez, Daniel McGinnis, Alex Myron, and Jesse Pacheco. From Facilities, Jeff Erickson, James Fesser, Christopher Metzner, Jim Muchmore, Robert Schmidt and Dan Smith. Marketing, Rachel Schneider and Steve Yingling. University Police Services Northern Command, Christopher Nero, Ed Millam, Michael Nakamura, Robert Ramirez and Matthew Romero. Audio Visual, Rick Romero, Claudio Osinaga, Joseph Domingo, Ben Labrador, Martin Santos, James Unfried, Samuel Williams. From SCS, Brian Anzalone, Gar Casal, Bentley Holmes Gull, and Jessica Grau. A Catered Affair, John Herzl, Linda Herzl, and Lauren Brownlee. And our other campus partners, Mardell Wilkins from GBC and Catherine Lowry from the system office in Las Vegas. And I'd also like to thank Winter, Angela, and Carrie for all the work that they do. And again, to President Dalpy and WNC for hosting us here. Thank you so much. Next, I'll move into public comment. Is there any public comment at GBC?
There is none at this time.
Thank you. Is there any public comment at the system office in Las Vegas?
There is not.
Thank you.
Yes,
Oh, yes, Regent McMichael.
yes. Regent Donald McMichael, MCMICHAEL. I just wanted to make this public comment that we are public officials, and most, if not everything that we say, post, or tweet is subject to public scrutiny. And these pieces of information that are available to the public means that they have the right to criticize or make comments on what we say. And as it's been repeated time after time, our words have meaning. And so I would like to remind all of us that your ex posts or tweets or Facebook is scrutiny to public preview. So be very careful and be ever mindful that the public is watching. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any public comment here at WNC? Oh, Regent Cruz Crawford, and then, yes, please.
Regent Cruz Crawford for the record. I did want to say that I will be fiercely working to keep the IDEA committee. I think it's very valuable to identify the supports and the gaps of needs and supporting our students. So I will be working to make sure that we never have a sunset date on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kent Irvin, Nevada Faculty Alliance. In my 2 minutes of trying to get every point in, I have neglected up to now to really thank the ad hoc committee on the formula for the hard work. I don't want to name everyone, but I'll call out Chair Hardesty. Chief Justice Hardesty was amazing and really put a lot of time in, and we really appreciate that he listens to constituents, including NFA, Patty Charlton, Chris Fatone. Were very helpful in the dialogue, both during committees and answering questions. And, you know, we may have a different spin on numbers, but we want the numbers to be right. And the students who gave the presentation and then the NFA, along with the faculty senate chairs, were allowed to also give a presentation during the meetings. You know, it's not great just to have a new distribution formula, and we have to work on the funding, and we all know that, and we need to work together on that. But thank you to all who were involved, and the regents and legislators and everyone who was involved in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Regent Boylan.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to make a public comment, and I'd like for you and everybody else on this board to read about new business is limited to description and clarification of the subject matter of the item, which may include the reasons for the request and no substantive discussion. I think some of us need to go back to high school or junior high to understand the difference between discussion and statements and what's said here in the Nevada open meeting law that stated NRS 241, et cetera, et cetera. So it says very clearly, description and clarification of the subject matter. We've got into this habit, the chairs, because of one of our last councils. Anytime you try to speak or try to clarify the subject matter, it's known as a discussion. Please look up the word discussion in the Webster's dictionary or any other one that you have. A discussion is not between one person and themselves. We are not crazy. It has to be between at least two people. So I think even our council needs to look at this very carefully. And from now on, I really appreciate it, Chair, if you read this carefully also and didn't try and stop me every time I was trying to make a new business item. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, that's right, public comment here at WNC. Is there any public comment on the phone, SES?
There are no callers at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So at this point, we have nothing else on this agenda, so this meeting is adjourned at 11:12. Thank you.